Shadow Slave, A Visionary's Guide. Author, Spineless Tree 77. Chapter 1-12. Ivan sighed heavily once again. The blond boy with golden eyes had been staring at his runes ever since he opened his eyes in this world. Prying his eyes off the runes, he looked around at the Sleepers' compound situated near the heart of the Awakened Academy. The building was encircled by numerous training fields and parks, creating a striking juxtaposition between the artificial structure and the lush natural landscape. He was led to a great hall filled with hundreds of other awakened sleepers like themselves waiting for the induction ceremony. The Awakened Academy really isn't a joke. The novel's description severely under-described this titanic structure. Ivan found himself in the middle of the whole crowd. He was surrounded by sleepers from legacies or unfortunate people who were merely mundane people just few weeks ago. Still disoriented, Ivan found himself staring at his runes once again. Name: Ivan. True name: Adam. Description: Rank: Sleeper. Class: Devil. Soul cores: 4/7. Soul fragments: 23 4/1000. Attributes: Spectator, Secret Suppliant, Sailor, Bard, Reader. Aspect: Visionary. Aspect rank: Divine. Description: The visionary is a master of thought and imagination. You are able to shape the flow of time and history itself through foresight. With unparalleled clarity, they can perceive and determine the emerging trends of the world, molding the future with their will. Innate ability: Envision. Attempts: 7/7. Envision. Ability description: You possess the power to shape reality by envisioning it. You can create grounds, objects, and even powers from your imagination. What you see in your mind will come to life, transforming the world around you, though each creation is limited by your mental strength and vision. Your imagination holds the key to the future, and the future bends to your will. Sub-ability: Holy Ground. Description: You can envision a blessed space, an area where those within a 20-meter radius are granted a strength beyond their rank and limitations. Allies are empowered, receiving physical fortitude and minor healing, though the latter is not as potent. It is a place of refuge and power, where the divine flows freely and amplifies those who stand within. Sub-ability: Imbuement of Life, 0/2. Description: Through your power, you can breathe a unique sense of life into inanimate objects, transforming them into living beings that resemble familiars. These entities are bound by your will, becoming extensions of your mind and will, capable of carrying out tasks. F***ing hell, no matter how many times I look at it, this is still insane. I was just making instant ramen the other night while reading, and the next morning I found myself in the same God's forsaken world of the novel. I straight up skipped the first nightmare and woke up as a sleeper. I don't know if I am lucky or unlucky. Firstly, I don't even have a clue of the nightmare's cruelty. Second, these runes. Ivan rubbed his tired eyes again. He has been doing this almost all the time after he woke up here. He looked at the runes again. There is no question this is basically what Adam's rune would look like if he transmigrated into Shadow Slave. Visionary, Secret Supplicant, Bard, Sailor, Reader. This is the God Almighty pathways but in the form of attributes: Divine Aspect, Aspect Legacy. Quote, all of it's straight up copy of the real thing. Also, I woke up with 4 soul cores. Didn't Ancient Sun God, ASG, also wake up as a dual pathway true God? Instead, I woke up as a sleeper while ASG woke up as a true God, which would be the divine rank in this world. Is it because I am also Ukrainian? Am I supposed to be the Ancient Sun God of this world? What about the main protagonists of this novel, Sunny and Neffys? Immediately after the chattering crowd went silent, turning his head he looked at the direction everyone was staring at. Well, speak of the devil. Neffys of the Immortal Flame clan and Sunny the future Lord of Shadows, but now here as sleepers. Their appearance is just as the novel described. Neffys was a tall, slender girl around Sunny's age, with clear gray eyes and a detached look on her face. She had silver white hair that was cut short and neatly parted to the side, and Sunny, he is a frail-looking young man with pale skin and dark circles under his eyes. He was unhealthily thin and pale, looking haggard in cheap clothes due to lack of sleep. It seems I am around the start of the Shadow Slave. Everything is going according to the story. And here I am right in front of the characters I only knew as words and arts from the Shadow Slave community, not like there were that many fan arts. Lost from fanart is a fitting name. Hearing commotion, Ivan saw Sunny talking to Castor's group. Right, Sunny's flaw, he is making a scene so no one takes him seriously and underestimates him. He watched as Sunny made himself look like a fool in front of everyone. He watched as Sunny got slapped by the female sleepers. Poor guy, can't even get a break and won't get a decent one in a long time. I will make sure to pray for you, Sunny. First and foremost, I need to plan ahead. I am not fighter other than my sailor and bard pathway. I am not at all prepared for the dream realm. I am a coward. I have no intention of fighting. I should be of the Lord of the Mysteries pathway instead of the God Almighty pathway. Still, I am quite fortunate I don't have to die in the first nightmare, and I know almost all the important information regarding my pathways, as well as the aspect legacies. Furthermore, this isn't the LOTM universe. Had I awakened in that universe, I would be dead before I even processed the first visual signal from my eyes. Speaking of aspect legacies, Ivan focused on the runes. Aspect legacy. Quill of Alzuhad. Description. The legendary quill you wield has the power to bring anything written with it to life, within the bounds of reason. What is penned will take shape in the real world, guided by the logic of your vision. With each stroke, you etch reality itself, molding the future through words alone. Unwanted attention. Description. When you place a mark upon someone, a direct connection forms between you and the marked. Through this bond, you gain the ability to communicate with or bestow gifts upon them. Your meta-awareness sharpens. Anything spoken or thought about you will be known to you. The deeper the mark, the more influence you gain. As the marked's trust and belief in you grow, so does your power over them, allowing you to manipulate their actions and perceptions with greater ease. The more they know of you, the more you know of them. Closing square bracket. Memory name. Quill of Alzuhad. Memory rank. Memory type. Enchanted artifact. Memory enchantments. Fated. Why is this happening? Fated. Description. Anything written by it, within logical boundaries, will come true. Why is this happening? Description. The more you use it, the more it will throw you in unwanted scenarios. Name. Unwanted attention. Rank. Type. Mark. Memory enchantments. Binding gaze. Enchantment. Description. The mark creates a bond between the bestower and the marked, allowing the bestower to communicate and bestow gifts onto them. The stronger the marked's belief in the bestower, the greater the influence, while the bestower gains insight into the marked's thoughts and secrets. Marks. 0/1. Flaw. Unraveling mind. Flaw. Description. Every time you reshape reality, a piece of your mind slips into madness. The more you create, the more you lose control. Visions become nightmares that torment your psyche, and you risk becoming a prisoner of the abyss of madness that not even gods can escape, forever trapped in endless suffering. Quill of Alzuhad is exactly like how it is in the LOTM universe, and unwanted attention is basically a severely underpowered version Adam's meta-awareness, as well as a mix of Sunny's aspect legacy, Mark of Shadow, was it. And Cassie's ascended ability. Speaking of Cassie, turning his head to a corner where a bench laid and the area around it strangely empty, for some reason, sleepers were unwilling to approach it. Currently, there was only one girl sitting quietly on the bench. The quiet girl was delicate, demure and very pretty. Her clothes were tidy and neat. They weren't very expensive, but still rather tasteful. With her pale blonde hair, big blue eyes and exquisite face, she looked like a beautiful porcelain doll. She was subtly breathtaking. Hell, where is the fairness? If she had tried, she could easily outshine every awakened in terms of looks alone. Looking at the girl's empty expression, it was understandable why no one would approach her. She is a dead weight destined to die the moment she enters the dream realm. Ivan looked at the girl with a pained expression, the despair and the fear she must be feeling. I can't even imagine myself blind, much worse imagine myself in a world where I am forced into a world of nightmares. She was my favorite character despite being misunderstood and being hated by almost everyone. I still supported her. I always felt sad that there weren't a moment she found a short amount of happiness. Awakened deserved it, and she too deserves it. She had around her a palpable aura of death, making it so no one was willing to approach her or even give her words of consolation. But as a reader of Shadow Slave, I know more than anyone here of how important her role is, and that she would just survive the dream realm but would go on to become transcendent and one of the most important figures in both worlds, and she is going to be my ticket to saving my butt. I can't leave her like this. I can't let someone feel this kind of despair. She needs all the encouraging words. Hey, I am already starting to act like a psychiatrist. Focusing on the runes. Aspect. Visionary. Aspect rank. Divine. Description. The visionary is a master of thought and imagination. You are able to shape the flow of time and history itself through foresight. With unparalleled clarity, they can perceive and determine the emerging trends of the world, molding the future with their will. Innate ability. Envision. Attempts. 7/7. Envision. Ability description. You possess the power to shape reality by envisioning it. You can create grounds, objects, and even powers from your imagination. What you see in your mind will come to life, transforming the world around you, though each creation is limited by your mental strength and vision. Your imagination holds the key to the future, and the future bends to your will. Focusing on attempts. 7/7. Attempts description. You are able to envision grounds, objects, and abilities above your rank temporarily for a limited time. Higher the level of the envisioned object, the less longer you can maintain and more likely it is for it to fail to manifest. Each attempt takes 5 hours to recharge, and each envisioning brings you closer to madness's embrace. As a visionary, I should be able to draw on the power of a psychiatrist. Ivan closed his eyes. Here goes nothing. Ivan imagined himself with the abilities of a psychiatrist and shortly heard a strangely familiar voice. The voice was calm and tranquil and almost soothing, yet it had a hint of inhuman feeling. Ivan opened his eyes to see a new set runes. Would you like to envision the abilities of a psychiatrist? Closing square bracket. Yes. The runes changed to form a new set runes replacing the former. Attempts. 6/7. Currently envisioned. Abilities of a psychiatrist. Timer. 4:59. Right after reading the runes, his ears were bombarded with inhuman illusory screams and a gaze breathing down the back of his neck. Ivan would have collapsed had he not attempted using his abilities before. The first time had caused him to nearly faint from extreme fear. There is a reason why flaws are an essential part of this world. The greater the power, the greater the flaw. If I hadn't kept it together the first time, I would have lost control, died, and had my soul in literal hell, constantly shattering, reforming and repeating for eternity. Even using my abilities would get me killed if I lost myself to my imagination and didn't use it with moderation. Straightening up and tidying himself, he walked towards the bench on the corner. Approaching the blonde girl, Ivan asked in a slightly cheerful tone. Is it all right if I sit here? The blonde girl looked in the direction of voice in clear surprise written all over her face. Which is understandable as no one even bothered to talk to her until now. Why, yes, you may. Her voice came out soft and strained from long exposure to isolation. Ivan sat down beside the blind girl. The blonde girl was about to ask something to the boy with golden eyes when Ivan grabbed her hand and placed something on her hand. Cassie was confused on what he gave her, so she asked, "What is this?" The boy with golden eyes replied, "It's a lemon smoothie I got. It's really good. I saw you were just sitting here alone with gloomy expression, thought I would share to liven the mood." Ivan spoke with a tone of that of a professional psychiatrist as well as one that a close friend and beloved family would use. Ivan muttered, "Step 1, liven the mood and remove suspicions." Cassie frowned. She didn't remember any smoothies being sold at the academy. If they were, she would have heard about it by now. Cassie assumed this was a crude prank meant to mock her blindness and humiliate her. "I don't remember the academy selling smoothies," Cassie said, her displeasure clearly evident in her tone. It was also indirectly saying, "Are you trying to pull a prank on me?" The voice of the boy who approached remained unchanged as he said without much thought, "Of course not, I brought it with me." This made her think that he had brought it from outside, but in reality, he had simply envisioned the smoothie as he walked toward Cassie. I'm sorry." Cassie immediately apologized out of fear and embarrassment. She had completely forgotten to consider that the boy might have brought it outside and not necessarily from the academy's food court. She closed her eyes, preparing herself and expecting the worst. Surprisingly, she felt the boy wave his hand dismissively, as if to brush aside her worries. "Ah, don't worry about it." While Cassie could no longer see, she gained something in return. In addition to heightened senses, she acquired the ability to see the attributes of other awakened individuals and receive revelations about both the past and the future. Her heightened senses told her that the boy beside her was considerably taller than she was, based on the tone and position of his voice. She turned her head toward him, and as her gaze fell in his direction, a bunch of runes appeared in the black expanse. Attributes: Spectator, Secret Suppliant, Sailor, Bard, Reader. She was shocked, not only to the fact that he has 5 attributes, while most people had 2 maybe 3 for the exceptional awakened sleepers, but having 5, she had never seen such a thing. But what surprised her most was the fact of how ordinary the attributes were. Cassie's thoughts seemed stuck. While 5 attributes were rare, these were nothing like the rare traits she had expected. Spectator, Secret Suppliant, Sailor, Bard, and Reader, each seemed so mundane. Having that many attributes would automatically make one assume that the individual is extraordinary, yet none felt particularly remarkable. Staring at the runes, Cassie thought, Spectator, Secret Suppliant, Sailor, Bard, and Reader, is he just a random bard watching everything from the sidelines, pursuing secret knowledge, and expressing it in songs and poetry? That wouldn't seem totally out of reason. The spell has always been known to be vague but also poetic sometimes. Still, with attributes like this, it's likely that he isn't that strong, or it might be that his attributes have less to do with his real strength. Noticing her staring for a while, the blonde boy with golden eyes asked in the same cheerful but thoughtful tone, "Is there something you want to ask me?" I'm sorry," she blurted out, flustered. "Come on, Cassie, get it together," she berated herself. Just as she apologized, she heard the boy beside her chuckle. It was like a soft melody, soothing her heart and mind. For a brief moment, the pessimistic voice in her head, the constant reminder of her impending death next month, faded away. The boy gave a polite cough and, with an embarrassed tone in his voice, said, "Right, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Ivan, and it's nice to meet you." Cassie smiled, her good mood evident in her voice. "My name is Cassie, it's nice to meet you too." Her prior pessimism had faded, and for the first time since she became blind, she was speaking to someone who wouldn't berate or speak ill of her. Ivan continued, "Now that we know each other a bit, I'll get straight to the point. Would you like to team up with me, if we meet in the dream realm?" Cassie found it hard to believe what she was hearing. This person wanted to team up with her. A dead weight like herself. She didn't answer for a moment, her mind racing. "Why?" Cassie asked, genuinely curious why he would consider teaming up with a blind person who was clearly going to hold him back. This time, Ivan fell silent for a moment. Then he said, "I have an attribute called Spectator and another called Secret Suppliant. These let me observe from a distance and uncover hidden truths. Earlier, I noticed you, specifically, your blindness, which was easy to guess as your flaw. It's a serious flaw, but knowing about the nightmare spell, I figured it must have granted you something powerful in return. Furthermore, when you were staring at me a bit longer than usual, I assumed you were using your abilities on me. That's why I approached you. I was hoping we could team up. But also because..." Ivan paused for a second, as if feeling shy about admitting something. Then he said, "It's also because I haven't been able to team up with anyone, but more than that, I believe you're someone I can trust." Throughout the conversation, Cassie remained silent, processing what Ivan had said and confirming her suspicions about his attributes. But what truly surprised her was that he had noticed she was using her abilities on him. Cassie, unsure of what to say, hesitated before asking another question. "But I can't fight. I'll just drag you down, I'll be dead weight, holding you back." As she spoke, her pessimistic thoughts flared up again. Suddenly, a hand appeared out of nowhere, patting her head and disheveling her neatly combed hair. Ivan's comforting voice filled her ears. Now, there's no need to feel bad. I might not be combat-oriented, but I do have the ability to keep us safe from most trouble. And you might not believe it, but I'm probably the most powerful person here, he said, puffing out his chest and blowing steam out of his nose in a cartoonish manner. And even if a fallen nightmare creature attacks us, I can one-shot it straight to the abyss. Listening to Ivan, Cassie fought the urge to laugh but couldn't hold it in. A small PFF escaped her, and Ivan gasped in mock horror. He adopted a dramatic tone, exaggerating his voice as if delivering a great tragedy. No way, you too. He then deepened his voice, continuing in a philosophical tone, as though mourning the state of humanity. It seems I am no longer taken seriously. Ah, if only I were Diogenes. He even added a fake tear, letting it trail down his cheek. That was the final straw. Cassie burst into a fit of giggles, unable to contain herself. Her laughter was contagious, and Ivan joined in, laughing just as freely. At that moment, they both seemed like teenagers, sharing a light-hearted moment and enjoying their time together. After the fit of laughter, Cassie wiped the tears from her eyes and held her stomach, still grinning. She felt happier, beyond happy. Ever since she became blind, she believed that she was destined to die next month in a pathetic, depressing way. But now, she had found someone who was not only willing to be her friend but also her teammate, someone who would help her survive in the dream realm. I'll be in your care, she said to Ivan, her voice filled with newfound hope. Ivan smiled. Of course. We'll make it through together. Turning to her, he added, why don't we share our abilities and come up with a plan so we can coordinate better? I'll start. I have 5 attributes: spectator, secret suppliant, sailor, bard, and reader. My aspect ability lets me create objects I'm familiar with or make food out of essences, and I can also create a holy ground with a 20-meter radius that buffs allies and provides minor healing. Cassie was shocked after hearing Ivan explain his abilities, though not in the same way as before. He wasn't joking when he said he might be one of the best here. The ability to create objects, make food from essence, and provide buffs with minor healing powers weren't combat-focused, but they were undoubtedly some of the best suited for surviving in the dream realm. As she looked at Ivan in a new light, her hope began to rise. She nodded and began to explain her own aspect ability. My aspect ability allows me to see people's attributes. I have to be close to an awakened or a nightmare creature to learn about their attributes. I also receive visions. Her voice lowered as she continued, they can be of the past or the future, but I can't control them. They come randomly. Ivan nodded thoughtfully. I see, he said, then in a cheeky tone, he added, so, you were looking at runes in the beginning. He said this with a playful intent, hoping to break her out of her negative thoughts. And here I thought my handsomeness had bypassed your flaw, allowing you to bask in the light of my beauty. He gave an exaggerated dramatic pause, as if reveling in his own charm. Cassie's eyes, devoid of light, snapped wide open as she turned to Ivan, her expression of disbelief. She stared at him as if he'd just spoken in a foreign language. That isn't funny, she retorted, though her face and ears had already turned a shade of red. Ivan immediately noticed and apologized, his voice softening. Ha ha. Sorry, I was just trying to liven the mood. Cassie puffed her cheeks out in indignation. Just as Cassie was about to respond, a commotion erupted nearby, drawing their attention. The golden-eyed boy watched as the sleepers gathered in front of the giant screen. Cassie turned her head toward the commotion. What's going on? She asked. Ivan hesitated before answering, his voice low. It's a list of everyone's chances of survival in the dream realm. Cassie's voice barely just above a whisper. I'm at the very bottom, aren't I? Ivan glanced at her with a mix of sympathy. Yeah. Cassie's bangs fell over her eyes. She forced a pained smile. It's to be expected, there is no way a blind girl makes it far in a place like this. As her pessimistic words hung in the air, Ivan moved swiftly, his hand suddenly appearing at her lower abdomen. Cassie stiffened, her breath catching as his touch was deliberate, almost jarring. She let out a stifled moan, a mix of surprise and discomfort, as he pinched and massaged the pressure points around her stomach with surprising skill. What are you doing? Cassie stammered, her face flushed deep crimson as she pulled back sharply, eyes wide with shock. Ivan smirked but didn't let her go. Just trying to break you out of your self-pity spiral. Cassie balled her fists and swung them toward him in a hasty punch, but the motion was more comical than anything. Her small, uncoordinated strike barely made contact, and Ivan burst into laughter. Come on, Cass. You've gotta do better than that. Cassie scowled, though the redness on her puffed cheeks didn't quite fade. You're insufferable. Cassie asked again, why hasn't the commotion died down yet? She turned her gaze in the direction of the gathered sleepers. Ivan answered, his tone steady. It's about the number one sleeper, Nephes of the Immortal Flame Clan, and her true name, Changing Star. Is it even possible for a sleeper to have a true name? There was clear surprise and awe in her voice. Yeah, it's definitely possible. But they have to be extraordinary. Ivan's gaze flickered briefly, he knew Nephes isn't the only sleeper here with a true name. In fact, there are 3 sleepers with a true name and a divine aspect, 2 of whom would go on to shape the world with their adventures. After the breakfast period was over and the sleepers were all heading back to their quarters, Ivan offered to help Cassie get back to her room, and Cassie didn't deny it, she accepted his offer. Taking her hand, Ivan guided her through the hallways, their conversation light. After a few minutes of chatting and giving encouragement, he finally led her to her door, where they parted ways. Ivan then made his way back to his own quarters. Sitting on the bed, his eyes devoid of any emotions. Pulling out his runes. Name, Ivan. True name, Adam. Description, rank, sleeper. Class, devil. Soul cores, 4/7. Soul fragments, 23 4/1000. Attributes, spectator, secret suppliant, sailor, bard, reader. Aspect, visionary. Aspect rank, divine. Description, the visionary is a master of thought and imagination. You are able to shape the flow of time and history itself through foresight. With unparalleled clarity, they can perceive and determine the emerging trends of the world, molding the future with their will. Innate ability, envision. Attempts, 6/7. Attempt reset, 4 hours 24 minutes and 0 seconds remaining. Envision. Ability description. You possess the power to shape reality by envisioning it. You can create grounds, objects, and even powers from your imagination. What you see in your mind will come to life, transforming the world around you, though each creation is limited by your mental strength and vision. Your imagination holds the key to the future, and the future bends to your will. Flaw. Unraveling mind. Flaw description. Every time you reshape reality, a piece of your mind slips into madness. The more you create, the more you lose control. Visions become nightmares that torment your psyche, and you risk becoming a prisoner of the abyss of madness that not even gods can escape, forever trapped in endless suffering. Letting out a tired sigh, he recounted everything that had happened. I've got Cassie on my side now, and with time, she should develop a deeper trust in me. Her mental state was more unstable than I thought, something that wasn't explored in the novel. It's surprising how she even managed to survive everything. No wonder she trusts Nephes so much after Nephes saved her on the forgotten shore. In a place where death is constantly looming, being saved in that situation would undoubtedly make her trust the Savior more than anyone. That's why she chose Nephes over Sunny. Dismissing the runes, he lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling with a stoic expression. With the help of the psychiatrist's ability, I've resolved almost all of her mental and emotional problems. As the only person who has talked to her, listened to her, and joked with her, she will undoubtedly rely on me more. I am her savior, her light in this dark world that has abandoned her. Turning onto his side, he continued, this will give me greater control over how things progress. This isn't like reading a novel that only highlights the important aspects of the story. There will be a lot of things that weren't mentioned in the story. Getting up again, Ivan glanced at the clock on the bedside table. Classes will start soon. I should keep a low profile. Now that I have Cassie on my side, I should focus on the most important problem right now, surviving the dream realm. Taking out the paper with a list of classes, he scanned through the options. Choosing the most common classes chosen by most sleepers, I have no reason to go for wilderness survival. My aspect is basically the Swiss Army knife of surviving the dream realm. Though I might be blinded by my aspect, the reality is that I have no experience in survival. Gathering food, water, all of it can be handled by my aspect. But what about fighting? I am no legacy, I haven't even had my first nightmare. I need to learn how to fight. And what better way to do that than by going to combat classes? My reader attribute should give me near perfect memory, making it easier to learn copy from the sleepers and awakened instructors. Finalizing his thoughts, Ivan pushed the papers aside, a sense of determination settling in. He stood up, stretched, and headed for the shower. After a quick bath, he got dressed. With one last look at his room, he left for the first class of the day. The classes were decent, and the facilities provided were among the best. Ivan had made the most out of everything available to him, from learning the combat styles of others to gaining information about the dream world through the reader. Ivan was feeling proud of himself. I've never been this productive in a long time. Who am I kidding? I was never productive in my old world. As he thought about his past life, a melancholic smile spread across his face. He looked out the window at the city. Even though this was a dystopian world, it still had plenty of good things. Ivan continued walking. It had been several weeks, and today all the sleepers would finally enter the dream realm, only a few would survive. Cassie's mental state had improved a lot over the past couple of weeks. The multiple sessions of placating and constant interaction had helped her, and now she no longer needed to close herself off as a defense mechanism. She had begun expressing her pain, sorrow, worries for her family, likes and dislikes, and everything that weighed her down. As for Sunny, aside from the interaction that should have taken place between him and Cassie, which I interrupted, he moved exactly as he did in the novel. Wilderness survival classes took up most of his time, and the rest was spent spying with his shadow. I still don't understand how he got away with it. Turning his focus back to himself, Ivan practiced using his abilities and realized he had been overlooking his sailor power. Not only did it grant increased physical strength and aquatic abilities, but it also provided night vision. This was a valuable skill, especially for the Forgotten Shore, where water at night could be their worst enemy. As he arrived at Cassie's quarters, he noticed the blonde girl walking out, using the wall to navigate. Ivan quickened his pace, closing the distance between them, and called out to Cassie. "Hey, Cass." She turned her head toward him, her fingers still lightly pressed against the wall to guide her steps. Taking her hand and guiding her to the hall where the sleepers were being gathered. Ivan asked, "Didn't you sleep much last night?" A small yawn escaped her mouth. "I slept just fine, I feel sleepy despite it." Cassie asked a question in return, "Don't you feel sleepy?" Ivan's eyebrows narrowed. "Right, the sleepers should be very drowsy due to the winter solstice, but even though I feel sleepy, the feeling is just not strong enough." Without keeping Cassie in the wait, he answered, "Yeah, I feel like sleeping as well." They had a brief conversation while walking, and when they reached the main area where the sleepers were waiting, Ivan scanned the surroundings and spotted Sunny and Neffes, who were already there. Ivan and Cassie waited until Instructor Rock finished his speech and his warning to do their best to survive. Ivan helped Cassie reach her sleeping pod. As she entered it, he stayed nearby. He didn't placate her or use any psychiatric abilities, but instead offered genuine encouragement. Even without his spectator ability, he could tell she was scared. Taking a deep breath, he spoke in a confident voice. "Cass, whatever happens, don't worry. If we meet, we'll survive and make it out. And even if we don't, never give up. You're much stronger than anyone here. I'm sure you'll make it out." Without the help of a psychiatrist's abilities, Ivan couldn't offer encouragement tailored to a specific problem, but he gave his most genuine words yet. With that, he left the room. Cassie, who had been lying down in her pod, fought to hold back her tears and fears. The fact that there was someone who believed in her, despite everything, gave her strength. To the very last moment before entering what felt like hell, she couldn't give up. Suppressing her fears, she closed her eyes. Ivan lay down in his pod and waited. Several minutes passed as he waited to be pulled into the dream realm. The drowsiness was there, but it was weak. He should have fallen asleep immediately. After waiting a few more minutes, Ivan finally closed his eyes, only to be immediately greeted by vast darkness, as the strangely familiar voice of the nightmare spell echoed in his ears. "Welcome to the dream realm, Ivan. The forgotten shore." The terrain stretched out into the horizon, the desolate beauty of the place disturbed only by the faint rustle of movement. From a distance, a silhouette, small and swift, was being relentlessly pursued by massive, crab-like horrors with twitching pincers, their beady eyes glowing with hunger. The creatures moved with unnatural speed, their clawed legs digging into the ground as they closed in. The silhouette before them kept running, but the gap was quickly closing. The air crackled with the tension of the chase, and as the distance between pursuer and pursued narrowed, the details of the scene came into sharper focus. Closer still, the movements of the silhouette became clearer. A blonde boy carrying a blonde girl on his back, her arms tightly draped around his shoulders as he moved with all his strength. "Damn it, why did I have to go and shoot those oversized crabs?" Ivan cursed inwardly as he tightened his grip on Cassie's legs which were wrapped around his hip. Cassie's voice pierced through Ivan's frantic thoughts. "Ivan, what's chasing us?" Panic laced her words. As Ivan moved through the coral labyrinth, he glanced over his shoulder at their pursuers. One of the carapace scavengers, its chitin armor marked with a massive scar, chased them with blind fury. "Oh, just a bunch of oversized crustaceans," Ivan muttered, his mind already working to formulate a plan to throw them off the trail. Cassie opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, Ivan veered sharply to the side and darted into a narrow cave hidden behind a curtain of seaweed. The sudden shift in direction nearly threw Cassie off his back, but Ivan caught her just in time. Cassie barely had time to yelp before Ivan's arm wrapped around her, his hand quickly covering her mouth as he shushed her softly. Holding her close, he peered out through an opening in the cave entrance, hidden behind the thick seaweed. The carapace scavengers slowed, their glowing eyes scanning the area. After a tense moment, one of them let out a sharp screech, and the pack turned, sprinting off in the opposite direction. Despite her blindness, Cassie squeezed her eyes shut, as if trying to block the noise. When the last of the scavengers disappeared into the distance, Ivan slowly pulled his hand away from Cassie's mouth, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The tension in his body eased just slightly, but exhaustion quickly set in. "They're gone," he murmured, wiping the sweat from his brow. "We'll rest for a bit before we move again, before nightfall." Cassie, equally drained, gave a weak nod before her body gave in entirely. Without another word, she collapsed against Ivan's chest, her breathing steadying almost immediately as she fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. Visionary's survival tip: in the dream realm, never engage with nightmare creatures unless absolutely necessary. Several hours ago. Welcome to the dream realm, Ivan. Just as Ivan opened his eyes, he found himself falling from at least 100 feet in the air, the wind whipping past him as the world blurred around him. For a brief moment, panic surged, but the instinct brought about by the sailor attribute kicked in. With a quick, controlled twist of his body, he oriented himself mid-fall, arms and legs streamlined, preparing for impact. The black waters of the sea rose up to meet him like a dark abyss, but Ivan's concentration held. With a powerful thrust, he dove straight down, breaking through the surface with a perfect entry, the shock of the cold water momentarily numbing his senses. His body cut through the murky depths, and as he swam higher, the crushing pressure of the water gradually eased. Ivan's head broke through the surface, gasping for air, his body rocked by the relentless waves that threatened to drag him back into the dark depths. In the midst of the darkness, Ivan's night vision, granted by his sailor attribute, flared to life, illuminating the world around him with sharp clarity. Looking around while floating on the water body, Ivan gave an exasperated "TCH. Looks like I am getting the sunny treatment plus getting thrown 100 feet from the air." Floating on the water, Ivan glanced around, letting out an exasperated "tch." Great. Looks like I'm getting the sunny treatment, plus being thrown 100 feet from the sky. Ivan looked for a surface when his eyes landed on a faint shadow beneath the water's surface, a large pillar-like rock formation jutting up from the depths. Instantly, Ivan kicked his legs as he swam as fast as he could towards the rock formation, but the relentless waves kept throwing him off course. The strength boost from his sailor attribute became more pronounced, as if it had finally found its true element in the water. As Ivan swam toward the rock formation, something caught his peripheral vision. Turning his head to the northwest, about 25 meters away, he saw a silhouette. The figure was struggling to stay afloat, failing miserably against the relentless waves of the dark sea. Ivan's eyes narrowed as he finally made out the figure in the distance. It was Cassie, the blonde girl he'd spent the past month with at the academy. The blind seer was struggling desperately to stay afloat, her face twisted in fear and pain, tears nearly spilling from her eyes. Without hesitation, Ivan began swimming toward her. But just as he neared, another silhouette caught his attention. His heart froze. It was a creature, an unholy mix of an eel, mole, and squid. Its writhing tentacles were adorned with blades the size of kitchen knives. Ivan's hair stood on end, and for a moment, he hesitated. The instinct to flee surged within him, but he stopped him. No, I can't leave her. He gritted his teeth and swam harder, pushing himself toward Cassie. Ivan knew he was making a huge mistake. Facing a creature like that was nothing but a suicide. But he also knew he had no choice. His mind raced, quickly formulating a reckless plan. It was dangerous, but it was the only chance they had. When he was 5 meters from Cassie, Ivan wasted no time. He activated his aspect ability. New runes appeared before him. Would you like to envision the abilities of a light supplicant? Closing square bracket. Yes. The runes shifted, morphing into a new set. Attempts. 6/7. Currently envisioned. Abilities of a light supplicant. Timer. 4:59. In an instant, Ivan summoned a blinding white light. His plan had 2 parts. The first was to blind the monstrous creature, and the second, something that could very well be the last straw for him, was to attract every creature in the depths. If this squid-like horror was terrifying, then he would summon something even worse to scare it off, courtesy of the fool. As the light exploded outward, the creature's tentacles recoiled, its senses overwhelmed. Ivan could already hear the approaching creatures, some bigger, some faster, all coming from every direction. Without wasting a moment, he closed the remaining distance to Cassie, his enhanced senses guiding him through the chaos. Ivan immediately closed the distance, his hands wrapping tightly around Cassie's waist. Cassie flinched violently, her body stiffening in panic. She instinctively resisted, her nails digging into Ivan's skin, leaving thin scratches that trailed blood. Though physically weaker than Ivan, she was still a sleeper, stronger than a mundane person, and the relentless waves only made it harder for her to stay still. I've got you, Cassie, Ivan muttered, using all his strength to pull her into an embrace. He held her tight, one hand securing her waist, while the other gently stroked her back. He murmured something low, followed by a short, soothing song. The sound of his voice seemed to cut through the fear that gripped her, and she finally stopped struggling, her body relaxing into his arms. Hold on tight, he said softly, locking his arms around her and pushing with all his might against the waves. Dragging both of them through the water was no easy feat, but Ivan kept going. The splashing sounds of fierce underwater battles filled the air as he swam, but he couldn't afford to focus on them now. As he neared the rocky pillar formation, however, his heart sank. It was much higher than he'd thought. Cassie, exhausted and shaken, wouldn't be able to climb it. He needed a solution, and fast. Without hesitation, Ivan released one arm from around Cassie's waist. He raised his hand and envisioned an item, a grappling hook gun. The runes shimmered before him as he activated the ability. With a sharp pull, the grappling hook shot out, finding purchase on something solid. Cassie, hold on tight to me, Ivan instructed, securing her to his back. His voice was steady but urgent. She wrapped her arms around him, gripping tightly. Ivan didn't waste another second. He began climbing, the waves crashing against him as he pulled himself up, Cassie clinging to his back. It was slow, grueling work, each move requiring every ounce of his strength. But eventually, after several exhausting minutes, he reached the top. He collapsed onto the rocky surface, pulling Cassie with him. Both of them lay on their backs, too exhausted to move or even think. The only sound was the crashing of waves below them and the pounding of their hearts, as they fought to recover from the brutal ordeal. Shortly after, Ivan woke up to find the sky still dark. The waves crashed violently against the jagged, pillar-like rock formation where they had taken refuge. He turned his head, scanning the area, before focusing on his runes. Attempts, 5/7. Timer, 235-2. He sighed, frustration sinking in. Ivan had expected the dream realm to be a challenge, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer terror it held. It was nothing like in the novel he had read. It was far more horrifying. Up until now, he'd allowed his aspect and attributes to give him a false sense of confidence. But facing the true horrors of the dream realm, the nightmare creatures that lurked in every shadow, had shattered that illusion. His face twisted into a grimace, and he buried it in his arm, his breath hitching as light sobs broke through. The sound of his soft cries was almost inaudible, drowned by the crashing waves. It was a moment of weakness, one he couldn't afford to indulge in for long. Pulling himself together, after a few moments, Ivan gritted his teeth. He couldn't afford to break down. Not here. Not now. There was too much at stake. He took a slow, steadying breath, wiping his eyes with the back of his arm. His body felt heavy, the weight of exhaustion and fear pressing down on him, but he refused to give in. He forced his mind back into focus. He turned his head to the sleeping girl's direction. Their Cassie was depending on him. This wasn't the time for self-pity. He could wallow later. Right now, survival was all that mattered. Ivan decided to scout the surroundings, the memory of his harrowing experience in the water still fresh in his mind, leaving a deep sense of unease. As he pushed himself up, he realized with a jolt that he was completely naked. The cold wind bit at his skin, sending a shiver through him. While his sailor attribute helped dull the effects of the chill, it couldn't completely ward off the biting cold. He still couldn't help but shiver slightly, his body reacting instinctively to the harsh elements. He unconsciously turned his head toward the blonde girl. His gaze fell on her sleeping form, her delicate features, her modest chest, her fair skin. He immediately whipped his head in the opposite direction, heat rushing to his face. No, no, you can't look, Ivan, he scolded himself, his cheeks burning crimson. It's absolutely forbidden. Do not reach for the forbidden fruit. Memories of reading about Cassie's transcendent ability flashed through his mind, an ability that let her peer into the memories of anyone who met her gaze. Their secrets would be laid bare before her, stripped from them against their will. Of course, he couldn't avoid looking at her forever, but he reminded himself to stay vigilant. Besides, he didn't even have memories to draw on, despite arriving in this world equipped with a ludicrous amount of power. Not that it truly mattered. Envisioning could deal with such inconveniences. After a moment of focus, he envisioned a practical set of clothing for himself. Runes shimmered before his eyes, glowing faintly before solidifying into a functional outfit. The attire was simple yet efficient, a fitted black shirt beneath a lightweight armor vest, durable enough to withstand minor strikes without sacrificing flexibility. The pants were made of a reinforced yet breathable fabric, with plenty of pockets for carrying essentials. Sturdy, lightweight boots completed the outfit. Satisfied with the result, he turned his attention to Cassie. Concentrating again, he envisioned a set of clothes suitable for her. A neatly folded bundle materialized in his hands. Stepping closer to the sleeping seer, he was careful to avert his gaze. With a quick gesture, he envisioned a sturdy tent around her, the translucent top to allow light to filter in. The tent shimmered into existence. He crouched, unzipping the entrance quietly, and slipped the folded clothes inside, placing them near her. Ensuring he didn't disturb her, he zipped the tent closed again and stepped back, his movements as silent as the breath of wind. "It's better this way," he muttered to himself, casting one last glance at the tent before turning his attention to the surroundings. Ivan then turned his attention back to himself, or rather his aspect ability. Ivan focused on the runes. Name: Ivan. True name: Adam. Description: rank: sleeper. Class: devil. Soul cores: 4/7. Soul fragments: 23 4/1000. Attributes: spectator, secret suppliant, sailor, bard, reader. Aspect: visionary. Aspect rank: divine. Description: the visionary is a master of thought and imagination. You are able to shape the flow of time and history itself through foresight. With unparalleled clarity, they can perceive and determine the emerging trends of the world, molding the future with their will. Innate ability: envision. Attempts: 7/7. Envision. Ability description: you possess the power to shape reality by envisioning it. You can create grounds, objects, and even powers from your imagination. What you see in your mind will come to life, transforming the world around you, though each creation is limited by your mental strength and vision. Your imagination holds the key to the future, and the future bends to your will. Attempts: 5/7. Currently envisioned. Clothing: tent. Timer: 146. Ivan had recently discovered a new nuance to his aspect. He could envision as many items as he desired with a single attempt, so long as they didn't require continuous power to function. Clothes, food, and tools were simple enough to create and maintain. However, items like weapons or abilities demanded an additional attempt and could not coexist with other creations. This meant the clothes and tent he had just envisioned would persist as long as he could maintain focus, requiring no further attempts to sustain them. Sleepers are those who couldn't yet harness soul essence. Ivan's creations didn't rely on essence but rather on his mental strength. This would have been an overwhelming limitation had it not been for his reader attribute, which greatly enhanced his mind and intelligence. The memory of his recent escape with Cassie flickered through his thoughts, the moment he had used his Bard Pathway ability to sow chaos in the sea, giving them a chance to flee. "That was the reader attribute at work," he murmured. "I didn't even notice it before." The pathway had been silently working in the background, strengthening his mental acuity without drawing attention to itself. It wasn't a bad thing, though. Intelligence was what set humans apart from the nightmare creatures. Without it, he and Cassie would never have made it to safety. Ivan's mind, sharpened by the reader attribute, had become his greatest weapon, and he intended to wield it wisely. Despite the enhancements to his mind, the constant use of envisioning was taking its toll. The mental fatigue it caused was compounded by the persistent, inaudible ravings echoing in his mind. Thankfully, since he was only maintaining the clothes and the tent, the strain from his flaw was far less pronounced. Even so, it remained mentally exhausting, like an itch he couldn't quite reach. His thoughts were interrupted by movement from within the tent. Inside the tent, Cassie moved frantically, her hands sweeping across the ground in a blind panic as her breathing grew rapid and shallow. Her disorientation only worsened as she failed to remember where she was or how she had arrived there. From outside the tent, Ivan's calm voice rose above her panic. "Cassie, it's okay. You're safe. You're inside a tent I made for you. Just breathe." The soothing tone cut through her turmoil, and Cassie froze, her head tilting slightly as she focused on the familiar voice. Cassie's paw. Fear still gnawed at her, but the voice steadied her trembling hands. She dropped to all fours, tracing the ground in a desperate search for something, anything, that felt safe. Then the voice spoke again, clearer and closer this time. "Cassie, are you all right?" "It's me, Ivan," the voice said, gentle but firm. Ivan. That name stirred something deep within her. Memories rushed back. The boy who had befriended her at the academy, the only one who didn't abandon her when the others shunned her for being blind. He had been there for her when she was alone, right before she entered the dream realm. Her only friend. Her thoughts broke off as Ivan's voice came again. "You're safe here. Don't worry about anything. I left some clothes beside you. Get dressed, and then we can talk about what to do next." Cassie's breath hitched as his words registered. The bare feeling of her exposed skin suddenly became all too apparent. Her cheeks flushed, and she instinctively wrapped her arms around herself, trying to cover what she could. Did you?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, her face burning. "No, I didn't see anything," Ivan assured quickly, his tone resolute and respectful. "I stayed outside the tent the entire time. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." He paused before adding, "Take your time. I'll wait out here until you're ready." Reassured by his words, Cassie reached out, her fingers brushing against the soft fabric of the folded clothes Ivan had left for her. She picked them up, her movements slow and deliberate. As she felt the material. "He really saved me, he really came to help me," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. Struggling slightly, she began to dress, her mind a whirl of emotions, embarrassment and relief. Ivan stood a short distance from the tent, his arms crossed as he waited. The zipped entrance rustled, and then slowly opened. Cassie stepped out, her hands trailing along the tent's wall to guide her movements. He let out a relieved breath, at least now he wouldn't have to keep awkwardly turning his head away every time he checked on her. The dress she wore fit her to perfection, the lace up front adding a subtle touch of elegance that accentuated her slim figure. The deep purple fabric cascaded down in soft, flowing folds. It wasn't extravagant, but it made her presence quietly captivating. In her hand, she held a piece of lace cloth, rectangular in shape, with an intricate design, over which she ran her fingers as if it offered her a sense of comfort. "Ivan," she began, her voice uncertain. She held up the lace cloth. I think I ruined the clothes you made for me." Ivan's gaze shifted to the intricately laced cloth in Cassie's hand. A soft smile tugged at his lips as he stepped forward. "You didn't ruin anything," he reassured her gently. "That piece is separate, it's for a different purpose." He reached out, taking her hand to retrieve the cloth. Moving behind her, Ivan carefully positioned the lace over her eyes. "It's to cover your eyes," he explained softly, tying the cloth securely but comfortably under her hair. His fingers adjusted her dress slightly to ensure everything fit perfectly. Circling back to face her, Ivan's smile brightened, almost radiant despite the dim surroundings. "You look great, Cassie. That blindfold adds a touch of mystique, it makes you look like a true seer. Plus," he added cheerfully, "it softens the blank look your eyes have, which can sometimes make people uncomfortable. Now, they'll see you as someone to admire, not to fear." Ivan then stopped abruptly. Cassie stood still, her fingers brushing against the edge of the blindfold as his words sank in. Her lip quivered, and before she could stop herself, she took a tentative step forward, then another. She reached out, her hands finding Ivan, and suddenly wrapped her arms around him tightly. Thank you so much, Ivan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "For everything, for saving me, for helping me, for being here." Her gratitude spilled over, tears streaming down her face as her emotions overwhelmed her. She buried her head in his chest, her sobs racking her small frame. Her knees buckled beneath her, and Ivan followed her descent, lowering to one knee to hold her steady. Cassie's tears came in waves as she clung to him, releasing all the fear, loneliness, and pain she had carried. I don't know what I would have done without you," she sobbed, her voice muffled against his chest. Ivan said nothing. He held her close, one hand resting on her back in a comforting gesture. His expression, however, betrayed no emotion. His golden eyes stared past her, distant and unreadable, as though they were fixed on something far away, or perhaps on nothing at all. The two figures, one trembling, the other silent and still. Behind them, the first rays of the rising sun pierced the horizon, casting a golden glow over the surreal landscape. The dark sea began to retreat, its inky waves slinking away as if fleeing from the encroaching light. In its place emerged a sprawling coral labyrinth, twisting and reaching like veins of some ancient, otherworldly creature. The corals, vivid red hues shimmered eerily under the sunlight, their strange luminescence adding an unearthly glow to the scene. It was as if the world itself was revealing the hidden wonders in the wake of the night's darkness. Ivan's expression twisted, the veins on his forehead pulsing with a strange intensity, a stark contrast to the calm composure he'd shown moments before. But Cassie didn't notice. Her tears, now flowing freely, consumed her focus. She held onto him, her sobs ragged and desperate, unaware of the subtle changes in him. For a brief, unsettling moment, Ivan's gaze shifted. Confusion flickered in his golden eyes as if he'd been snapped out of a trance. But the look was fleeting, replaced almost instantly by a softness that matched the comforting rhythm of his hands on her back, gently patting her as she cried herself to silence. As Cassie's sobs slowed, her breathing becoming more steady, Ivan pulled back slightly, his hands lingering on her shoulders. He gave her a reassuring smile, though there was something distant about the way his lips curved. She didn't notice. She was, after all, blind. They sat together in silence for a while, the weight of the night's events settling between them like a blanket of stillness. The golden light of the rising sun continued to bathe the world around them, the eerie glow of the coral labyrinth beginning to fade into the harsh clarity of daylight. Ivan finally broke the silence, his voice low and steady. This place, he gestured to the strange landscape stretching before them, the coral structures pulsating like the very heart of the dream realm. It's unlike any other region in the dream world. Cassie frowned, her brow furrowing as she tried to understand what Ivan was saying. She'd heard of many strange places within the dream realm, of course. I've never heard of this place, she murmured, her voice quiet with uncertainty. Not in any of the Academy's lessons. Her voice wavered slightly, a trace of worry creeping in. Ivan noticed the change in her tone, the way her eyes narrowed with growing concern. He turned to her, his expression calm, unreadable. Well, it's a big world, he said, as if the answer was simple. And the dream realm is vast. Some places just haven't been discovered yet. Cassie wasn't convinced. But Ivan's demeanor was unwavering. To her, it was both reassuring and unsettling. She wanted to ask more but was afraid, he had already done so much for her. Still, her worry continued to gnaw at her. She wrapped her arms around herself, pulling the lace cloth tighter around her eyes. Ivan, she began again, her voice trembling, though she tried to hide it. Can we get out of this place? What if we can't get out? Ivan's eyes softened, and for the briefest moment, a flicker of something, concern, maybe, passed over his face. But the moment was gone as quickly as it came. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice gentle yet firm. Cassie nodded slowly, though her heart was still heavy. But, what do we do now? Ivan was silent for a moment, his gaze far off again, his golden eyes reflecting the brightening light of the morning. We will have to move from here eventually, staying in one place would pose more danger. He said at last, his voice resolute. From what I understand of this place, the sea comes back the moment the sun sets and goes back into hiding the moment dawn comes. Cassie. She didn't have to ask what he meant. Her fingers brushing the lace cloth over her eyes again, and lightly nodded. All right. Ivan's paw. Ivan and Cassie had decided to wait on the rock formation for another day. It was a precarious decision, but staying in one place was safer than wandering aimlessly, at least for now. Ivan had envisioned some basic meals, biscuits, beef jerky, and military-style canteens. He could have envisioned something more comforting, like a warm homemade stew, but he didn't. There were two reasons for this. First, eating envisioned food too frequently might have side effects, though he wasn't entirely sure if that could be true, but he decided to be careful. He wasn't willing to take a risk on it. Second, growth, real growth, could only happen if they adapted to the world around them, and that meant getting used to the meat of nightmare creatures. That's what the dream realm demanded. To survive, they needed to embrace its horrors, not shy away from them. Aside from that, there was something deeper. Until now, Ivan hadn't had a clear goal. Surviving the forgotten shore had been the only thing on his mind. But that had changed after their conversation earlier. Cassie had talked about her family, her childhood dreams, the things that once brought her joy. And then she asked him a question. A simple one. What was your dream before the nightmare spell? Ivan had no answer. It wasn't that he didn't have dreams once, but they felt like distant memories now, almost as if they belonged to someone else. He'd guided the conversation away from that question without offering a real answer. But deep down, something had shifted. Now, as he watched Cassie eat her dried, packaged food, he found his thoughts turning toward the future. His gaze flickered to her side profile, watching the blind seer carefully break off a piece of jerky and chew it slowly. She had been silent for a while, her blindfold securely in place, but there was a hint of calm in the way she moved. The sense of change was ever present, but she was adapting, albeit slowly. Occasionally, he stole glances at her out of the corner of his eye, but then he refocused on his own food. They needed to stay vigilant. After they finished eating, there was a sound, a faint rustling from the edge of the rock formation. Ivan's senses sharpened, and without hesitation, he turned to Cassie. "Hide," he ordered, his voice steady but urgent. "In the tent. Now." She didn't hesitate, ducking inside immediately. Ivan's eyes followed her for a moment before he moved swiftly to the edge of the rock formation, peering over to see where the sound had come from. As Ivan neared the edge of the rock formation, his eyes locked onto a creature that looked like an oversized crab clad in jagged armor. He had never seen this creature with his own eyes, but he instantly recognized it from the descriptions in Shadow Slave. Carapace scavengers. The realization sent a chill down his spine. While knowing about them gave him an edge, it didn't make him feel any safer. The scavengers were dangerous, and he was no match for them. They were nightmare creatures he couldn't afford to confront. Thankfully, they were still at a distance. For now, there was no immediate danger. Ivan backed away carefully, making sure not to disturb any loose rocks, and returned to the tent. Inside, Cassie sat, her legs pressed against her chest. Her posture was tense, clearly showing he was worried and scared. The blindfold over her eyes made her expression more pronounced than he had expected, or he might be seeing too much. "What did you see?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with apprehension. "Some nightmare creatures, ones we should avoid at all costs," Ivan replied, keeping his voice calm. "They're far away right now, but we will need to stay alert." As he expected, Cassie's face paled, and her breath quickened, almost on the verge of panic. Only a few months ago, she'd been an ordinary person, unaccustomed to the harsh realities of this world. Ivan crouched down in front of her and rested a hand on her shoulder. "Cassie, listen to me," he said firmly but gently. "We're safe for now. They haven't noticed us. But I need you to stay calm. Trust me, I've got this under control." She nodded shakily, her fingers loosening their grip. It took some time, but her breathing steadied. Ivan felt a pang of guilt as he watched her struggle to keep it together. He stood and glanced outside the tent, keeping his voice low. "We'll need to move soon." Ivan could have tried to challenge those oversized crabs, however he couldn't. Unlike others, who bore only one flaw, Ivan's power felt as if it had multiple flaws. He could manifest items, abilities and other things, but sustaining them demanded a toll that no ordinary sleeper could or should be able to bear for extended periods of time. Even so, he reminded himself, it's still absurd that I can do this at all, and as a sleeper no less. Few could rival him, perhaps only divine aspect holders like Nephis. But even comparing himself to her felt premature. She was a seasoned warrior, capable of healing herself and with years of experience in combat. Sunny was still growing into his power, and Mordred. Well, Mordred remained imprisoned in the Chained Isles. His thoughts returned to Cassie. In the short time they had been together, she had started leaning on him more, seeking his reassurance and preferring to stay by his side. It wasn't surprising, given her circumstances, but Ivan couldn't help but feel conflicted. He was protective of her, maybe even overly so, but Cassie was a pivotal figure in the story. Her actions shaped key events. By ensuring that she was safe and went according to the story, albeit with some changes with me guiding her, he could influence the course of the novel's events without disrupting the story too drastically. But as he watched her lying down beside him, her expression soft and vulnerable, another thought gnawed at him. She's already endured so much. I shouldn't let her carry more than she has to while I am around. He frowned and shook his head. "No," he murmured under his breath. "I'll lighten her load." That's one thing I am changing in this world. Speaking of Sunny and Neffis, the central figures of the story. The burst of light I created last night might have alerted them. A miniature sun in the dead of night wasn't something they could ignore. Two outcomes seemed likely: they'd either investigate or steer clear. HMPH. Ivan exhaled sharply. Whatever the case, they'll start moving soon. As he prepared to settle in for some rest, a strange sensation prickled at the back of his neck. Something felt off. He sat up abruptly, scanning the tent's interior. His eyes caught on one side of the tent's fabric. It wasn't taut like the other. A premonition gripped him. He bolted outside and strode to the edge of the rock formation, his movements swift but silent. Peering down, he couldn't make out much. He envisioned a periscope, one modified specifically for this situation. The device shimmered into existence in his hands, its intricate parts fitting together like clockwork. He raised it to his eyes, adjusting the lens to focus on the base of the rock formation. What he saw made his blood run cold. The foundation of the rock pillar was crumbling. Large cracks spread across its surface like spiderwebs, and the entire structure had begun to tilt dangerously, as if it were a tree about to fall. His heart hammered in his chest. "Fucking hell," he muttered. If the pillar collapsed, they'd lose their vantage point. And worse, it would draw the attention of the scavengers. Ivan's mind raced. We need to move. Now. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Guys, I was busy last night so I forgot to make a video of this novel. I was planning to make Shadow Slave a Visionary's Guide as a one-shot, but now I'm going to make it into 2 videos. I didn't even have time to do the poll for thumbnail. I am sorry, it was my mistake. And please support the author by link in description. Ivan didn't hesitate. He turned on his heel, sprinting back toward the tent. Cassie. His voice was sharp, urgent. She stirred, eyes flicking open underneath the lace blindfold in confusion. Get up, we need to move, now. He grabbed her, pulling her to her feet. What's happening? She asked, her voice tinged with alarm. Without responding, Ivan darted towards the exit, dragging Cassie behind him. Okay, Cass, we have a change of plans. We're moving west, as fast as possible, Ivan said in a perfectly controlled voice, not allowing any trace of his worries to slip through. Confusion across Cassie's face. She wasn't sure why Ivan was acting with such urgency. Why? To where? Though the questions were simple, there was a layer of worry in her voice. She imagined all sorts of possibilities, from the nightmare creatures Ivan had seen before to more horrifying abominations closing in on them from the air. Ivan had 2 options: reveal the truth, which would likely send Cassie into a panic. Her mental state was already delicate, and adding more stress could have disastrous consequences. Even though Ivan hadn't been a psychiatrist before transmigrating into this God's forsaken world, his attributes had begun subtly influencing his thoughts and actions. His spectator attribute, in particular, had been affecting his personality, making him more attuned to the psychological states of others. Still, even though I'm not envisioning psychiatrist, I'm still being affected. Does that mean I don't need to unlock those attributes to benefit from them? Ivan thought, the question flickering in his mind as he processed everything at once. The second option was to lie to Cassie, keeping her mental state stable while offering a convincing excuse to cover up the real threat. But what kind of excuse could he use? Damn it, Ivan mentally groaned, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Ivan chose the second option, settling on a half-truth. He made his voice carry a hint of excitement as he said, I have a feeling there might be a human settlement or a citadel in the western direction. Though I'm not too sure, so far my aspect has never failed me. Cassie's eyes widened slightly. A settlement? Are you sure? Ivan nodded quickly, though the words felt foreign on his tongue. It's a gut feeling, but I've learned to trust it. It was all a lie, of course. He knew exactly where they were heading. The novel had given him all the details he needed, but he couldn't let Cassie know that. His mention of aspect was a subtle nudge toward his sailor attribute, a detail that might explain his confidence in navigation. It was a clever way to divert suspicion without revealing too much. Cassie hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, if you say so. A few moments later, Cassie's curiosity got the better of her. She couldn't help but ask. Ivan, what are you doing? She called out. The noises from Ivan's direction continued, metal clinking, the low hum of drilling. It sounded like he was trying to build a house, but Cassie didn't press him for answers. She did not want to disturb him. Ivan had told her to sit near the camp while he prepared something, and she had obeyed. The wind was gentle, a soft breeze that carried with it the scent of wet rocks. It was peaceful, and for a moment, Cassie felt a flicker of calm. I'm just setting up a way to get down from this rock formation, Ivan's voice called out from a distance. It's bloody huge, and no ladders would be tall enough. Using your rope wouldn't be ideal either, as carrying you down would be a gruesome task. Cassie, listening intently, felt a strange mix of gratitude and guilt at his words. I see. Sorry to disturb, she murmured, her words soft with understanding. No biggie, Ivan replied shortly. Just enjoy the breeze while I work on the way down. Cassie nodded slightly, even though Ivan couldn't see her. It wasn't like she could offer any help, the only thing she could do was trust him. She remembered how she'd felt when she first entered the dream realm. Her blindness had made everything many times worse. It had been so overwhelming, so terrifying. Back at the academy, she had cried herself to sleep every night, plagued by the pain of losing her sight and the despair that had followed. And then, Ivan came into her life. The way he had saved her from the depths of her loneliness, helping her break free from the pessimistic thoughts that had plagued her for so long, she still remembered it vividly. And now, in the dream realm, he had saved her again. Not only from the creatures that lurked in the dark sea but also from her own fears and insecurities. Cassie reached up to her face, tracing the delicate lace of the blindfold that covered her eyes. She hadn't quite gotten used to it, but it was comforting in a way. It almost felt like a protective layer, one that shielded her from the harshness of her reality. She ran her fingers over the fabric, feeling its softness. Her thoughts drifted to the clothes she wore, the ones Ivan had envisioned for her. They were simple but comfortable, not too fancy, but not plain either. They felt surreal to her, like she was in a dream within a dream. It was mildly cold, but not in an uncomfortable way. The chill was a comfort, almost like a reminder that she was alive, that she was here. Still adjusting to the sensation of wearing these new clothes. Envisioning the aspect ability that he shared with her. It's beyond anything I've ever heard of. It's not just survival, it's like he's crafting his own reality, bending it to his will. The realization hit her harder than before. Ivan's power was like something only gods should possess. Every aspect, every ability has its strengths and weaknesses, but his. It was bizarre, almost absurd in its potential. What would he be capable of if he awakened? Cassie's heart skipped a beat at the thought. How powerful would Ivan be if he awakened? For the first time since arriving in this twisted world, Cassie felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't entirely helpless. And yet, guilt gnawed at her. But why did he choose me? She thought. I'm just a blind girl. What use can I be? Despite her ability to see the past and future through her visions, they were erratic, random, and often out of her control. They weren't the kind of power that one could rely on. And yet, Ivan had chosen to stay with her. He had chosen to team up with a blind girl when there were so many others who could offer more. Cassie's fingers trembled as they rested against the blindfold again. She felt a strange emptiness growing within her. Trust, that was all she had to offer. Her thoughts were interrupted when Ivan called out to her. Cass, I'm done. Let's start moving. Okay, have you ever bungee jumped before? Ivan asked. Bungee jumped. Cassie tilted her head, confused by the sudden question. Bungee. That's rubber or elastic, isn't it? Jumping, with rubber. Wait, does he mean a trampoline? But then why didn't he just say trampoline? Yes, I have. In fact, it's one of my favorite things to do. Cassie replied quickly, hoping to mask her confusion. She suspected he was trying to distract her again. She wasn't naive. Ivan had been using random topics to shift the flow of their conversations, pulling her out of the dark abyss of her thoughts. Strangely, it always worked. Whenever he said something absurd or out of nowhere, she felt clarity and peace wash over her, pushing away the chaos in her mind. She didn't understand how he did it, but after so many times, she had begun to adapt. While she still struggled to accept her flaws, she was starting to come to terms with them. That's good, Ivan said after a brief silence. Now come here. We need to get down this place, so let's get you strapped to my back. Cassie blinked, surprised by his tone. Why does it sound like he was surprised? Also, he's treating me like a child again. Still, she didn't argue, letting out a soft, barely noticeable, reluctant huff as she allowed him to secure her. Ivan fastened straps and belts around her, then instructed her to climb onto his back. Once she was settled, another set of straps tightened around her, securing her in place. Her chest pressed tightly against Ivan's back, and for a moment, it felt suffocating. But she knew it was necessary for safety, and it wasn't unbearable. She noticed, however, that Ivan seemed to tremble slightly, his body heating up. Hey, are you okay? You're heating up, Cassie asked, her voice tinged with worry. Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking about something, Ivan replied, his tone unusually flustered. After a few more exchanges of reassurance, Ivan resumed checking the ropes and anchors he had drilled into the rock formation. Meanwhile, Cassie found herself observing his attire, a simple shirt and vest. She assumed it was for better mobility, as he had mentioned before that he wasn't a combat type. Despite this, his body was well-toned and strong, a fact she couldn't help but notice. Her cheeks flushed, and she quickly broke away from her thoughts when Ivan tapped her arm, signaling the final check. You ready? He asked. Yes, Cassie replied. Great, let's just hope we don't die. Yes, wait, what do you mean? Before she could finish, her stomach lurched as the ground seemed to drop away. Her insides hollowed out as if she were falling from the sky. Cassie tightened her grip on Ivan, clutching him with both hands and legs as her world turned into a blur of motion and adrenaline. The sudden drop left Cassie feeling hollow inside, as though her very being had been yanked downward. Every instinct screamed at her to cry out, but she knew better. One of the most important lessons drilled into her at the academy was simple: if a fight is avoidable, avoid it at all costs. Do not fight when it's unnecessary. Screaming would only invite the nightmare creatures. Instead of succumbing to fear, she buried her face against Ivan's back, gripping him with all her strength. Her arms clung tightly around his neck, and her legs locked around his torso. She didn't know if her hold was bothering him, but she had no time to worry about that. The descent began to slow, the wild rush of air around them easing. Still, she clung to Ivan as if her life depended on it. A faint tap on her arm registered at the edge of her awareness, but she ignored it, lost in her frantic focus. The tapping grew more insistent, accompanied by Ivan's strained voice. Cass, yo, your arm. She froze, realizing with a pang of guilt that her grip had tightened too much. Lifting her head, she loosened her hold abruptly, causing her to slip slightly in the harness. Panic shot through her, and she instinctively clutched at him again. Sorry, she stammered. Ivan let out a heavy breath, his voice strained but good-natured. It's fine. We're already down. We should get moving. Underneath the lace blindfold, Cassie furrowed her brows. She could sense his attempt to brush it off, but she wasn't going to let it slide entirely. Without warning, she reached out, her fingers brushing along his neck before trailing to his face. Ivan stiffened at the unexpected contact, a question forming on his lips. Cass, what are you? Before he could finish, she grabbed his cheeks with both hands and pinched them as hard as she could. Ow. Cass, ow, ow, ow. What's the big deal? She let go of his cheeks only to grab his ears, tugging them with enough force to make him yelp again. Cass. Okay, I'm sorry. I promise I won't pull another stunt like that again, Ivan pleaded. She finally let go of his ears, which were now red as a tomato. Even though she couldn't see anymore, the heat radiating from them told her enough. Cassie smiled smugly, satisfaction swelling in her chest as though she'd just accomplished a grand victory. Of course, she didn't let Ivan see it. Instead, she let out a soft HMPH, puffed her cheeks in mock indignation, and turned her head away, feigning disinterest. "Cass, come on. Don't ignore me," Ivan pleaded. His voice followed her like an unrelenting shadow as he maneuvered them through the crimson labyrinth. The maze's eerie glow bathed everything in a dim, ominous red light. "Cass, seriously, I'm sorry. I won't." Without warning, she poked his cheek with her finger, effectively silencing him. "You won't ever do that again, promise." Ivan quickly nodded, the movement so rapid she felt the jerk of it through her hands. "I promise," he replied, eager to reassure her. Content with his response, Cassie relaxed against his back, her earlier irritation melting into quiet amusement. "Good," she murmured, letting herself settle comfortably. They were about to continue forward when a sudden shift in the atmosphere made her stiffen. A looming shadow stretched across them, and the air seemed to warp, colder, hotter, she couldn't tell, only that it felt wrong. Cassie's breath hitched as she instinctively turned her head. Despite her blindfold, glowing runes appeared in the black void of her vision, their radiant symbols searing themselves into her consciousness. Name: Carapace Scavenger. Awakened Beast. ... Cassie's blood turned to ice at the sight of the words awakened beast. Panic seized her just as Ivan cursed under his breath. "You've got to be kidding me. Already?" Before she could process his words, Ivan launched them backward, narrowly dodging an attack. The air around them stirred violently, and the sound of something massive scraping against the muddy ground sent shivers down her spine. "Cass, cover your ears. It's about to get loud." She didn't hesitate. Loosening her arms from his shoulders, she let the straps secure her in place and pressed her hands over her ears as tightly as she could. Behind him, she felt something shift on Ivan's back, an unnatural writhing that made her stomach churn. She didn't have time to ponder what it was before he turned his body at an angle, bracing himself. And then it came. A deafening roar, like a cannon's blast, erupted, shaking the air and rattling her bones. Cassie clenched her teeth, the sound reverberating even through her covered ears. Whatever Ivan had unleashed, it was powerful, and it wasn't done yet. Right after their counterattack, Ivan broke into a run. He reached back, guiding her hands to wrap securely around his shoulders. As he did, Cassie felt the straps holding her tightly to him start to dissolve, one by one, until none remained. Ivan's voice cut through the chaos, firm and urgent. "Hold on tight." Moments later, she heard faint scratching sounds in the distance. "Damn it, why did I have to go and shoot those oversized crabs?" Ivan cursed under his breath, tightening his grip on Cassie's legs, which were wrapped around his hips. Cassie was worried. She couldn't see what was going on, and the situation didn't allow her to ask too much. All she knew was that they were being pursued by an awakened beast. Despite her fear, she couldn't help but ask, "Ivan, what's chasing us?" Panic laced her voice. After a few moments, Ivan replied, "Oh, just a bunch of oversized crustaceans." He tried to sound nonchalant, but the worry in his voice betrayed him. Crustaceans. Crabs. Were being chased by awakened oversized crabs. Despite the dire situation, Cassie found the thought strangely comical. Shaking off the distraction, she leaned closer, intending to ask another question. Before she could, Ivan veered sharply to the side. The sudden shift nearly threw her off his back, but Ivan caught her just in time. She barely had time to yelp before Ivan's arm wrapped around her, pulling her into his embrace. One hand covered her mouth as he softly shushed her. After a tense moment, a sharp screech pierced the air. Cassie shuddered, squeezing her eyes shut as if trying to block out the sound. In the distance, she could hear movements, but she didn't dare make a noise. Slowly, the tension in Ivan's body eased. "They're gone," he murmured, his voice barely audible. He released her and leaned back as she did the same, resting against his chest. The entire ordeal had sapped her strength. "We'll rest for a bit before moving again, before nightfall." Cassie nodded weakly and let herself doze off. Just before she fell asleep, she felt a hand pat her head gently. As Ivan's eyelids fluttered open, his vision remained blurry, like a fogged window waiting to be wiped clean. He blinked several times, trying to clear his vision. With a grunt, he rubbed his eyes with his right hand, hoping to dispel the lingering haze. Slowly, the details around him began to materialize. A small cave barely the size of a room, just big enough for a single bed. The air smelled of damp stone and sea salt, and the soft light filtering in from the seaweed-covered entrance illuminated the space in a muted, reddish glow. From the faint light, Ivan could tell that at least an hour and a half had passed since they'd taken refuge here, and there was still time before the tide came rushing back in. But as he surveyed the scene, something caught his attention. His heart skipped a beat. There, resting against him, was Cassie. Her back was pressed against his chest, her head nestled against him as she slept soundly. The blindfold that covered her eyes seemed to only enhance her beauty, her long blonde hair cascading across his arm. Despite her blindness, she appeared peaceful and calm, breathing softly as she slept. But the sight of her so close stirred an uncomfortable feeling deep inside him, a feeling that Ivan knew all too well. No, 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 Ivan thought, mentally berating himself. He was just a 17-year-old boy, and hormones were a relentless nuisance, always ready to rear their ugly heads at the worst possible moment. Especially in front of another girl. He fought the urge as his mind tried to keep his lower primal head under control. Cassie's back was pressed against his chest, her warmth radiating through him, and it took all of his willpower to keep his primal instincts at bay. He had to stay in control. Slowly, carefully, he shifted his body, gently moving her so that she was no longer leaning against him. He placed her down beside him, making sure not to wake her. After ensuring that she was comfortable, he draped a blanket over her to shield her from the cold dampness of the cave. Sitting back, Ivan took a moment to gather his thoughts. Their escape from the unstable rock formation hadn't gone entirely as planned, but they'd made it out alive. That was what mattered. He rose to his feet and peered through the seaweed-covered entrance. The labyrinth stretched ahead of him, splitting in two directions. One path was a dead end, barely visible through the dense foliage. The other path that would lead him straight into the domain of Nephis of the immortal flame. He returned to the cave, sitting beside Cassie, his expression becoming more serious as he considered their next steps. There was something gnawing at the back of his mind. His intervention had already altered the course of events. In the novel, Cassie was supposed to enter the dream realm and be rescued by Nephis, but Ivan had changed that. He had become her savior instead. That meant her loyalty was now tied to him, and in turn, she would be more susceptible to his influence. This could be both a blessing and a curse. But there was more. In the original timeline, Cassie had a crucial conversation with Sunny, a conversation that Ivan had effectively prevented. That conversation was meant to create the string of friendship between Cassie, Sunny and Nephis, and without it, things were already off track. However, Ivan knew one thing for certain. Sunny's fated attribute would still steer the story back toward its original course. Eventually, they would encounter Nephis, and Sunny's shadow would follow close behind. The problem, however, was Ivan's own presence in this altered timeline, one that would change the trajectory of battles, character development, and relationships. Nothing was going to unfold the same way it had in the novel. Just then, Ivan's thoughts were interrupted by an all-too-familiar sensation. His eyes twitched, and a vein bulged on his forehead. The headache was back, the same debilitating pain that he tried to get used to. His back began to writhe, as though something was crawling beneath his skin, and illusory scales began to appear, shimmering faintly beneath the surface. The unbearable pain brought about by illusory ravings caused him to collapse, falling face first to the ground, helpless. Before his eyes, runes began to materialize, glowing with an eerie light. Attempts: 4/7. Currently envisioned, a set of male and female clothing. Timer: 3:23. This was the cost of using his envisioning abilities. Every time he attempted to envision something, it came with a toll, pain, discomfort, and sometimes, complete physical breakdown. 3 attempts had been the limit, and Ivan had already used up 2, with 1 still hanging in the balance. If he pushed it further, if he tried to envision anything else, he risked losing control, and turning into a monster. He gritted his teeth, enduring the unbearable agony. For 10 long minutes, the scales writhed across his back, and his body burned with pain. Finally, the sensation began to subside. The scales faded, and the writing on his back ceased, returning to normal. Ivan let out a sigh of relief, his body trembling with exhaustion as he lay flat on the cold cave floor. Cassie, thankfully, remained asleep, blissfully unaware of the torment he had just endured. As his breath slowed and his body finally began to relax, Ivan pushed himself up, though his movements were sluggish. The pain had left him drained, but he still had to think of a plan. They couldn't stay here forever. They have to meet Nefis and Sunny, then reach the awakened settlements. But things weren't going to be as simple as they once were. He glanced at Cassie, still sleeping peacefully, and took a deep breath. Ivan had made his choice. He could only hope that it would all work out in the end. He decided to wait until Cassie woke up, using the time to create something for himself. With a quiet murmur, Ivan focused his energy and envisioned a self-heating hot pot. The rich aroma of hot, spicy, and sweet ingredients filled his senses. The broth, thick and savory with bits of tender meat floating lazily in the steam. The vegetables added a touch of color to the steaming concoction. The scent alone was enough to make his stomach growl, but when he tasted the first spoonful, his eyes widened in pure bliss. Savoring the flavor, the heat of the spices was balanced perfectly by the sweetness of the broth, the combination making his taste buds dance. Each bite was comforting, hearty, and strangely satisfying, as if the food was more than just a product of his imagination. It was real, and in that moment, it felt like the best meal he'd ever had. But just as Ivan was getting lost in the taste, a subtle shift in the air caught his attention. He looked over at Cassie. Her head was moving restlessly from side to side, and her eyebrows furrowed deeply, as if she were troubled by something in her sleep. Is she having a nightmare? Ivan thought, but then he remembered, no one could dream while in the dream realm. That could only mean one thing. She's having a vision. Ivan's eyes widened. Was she supposed to be having a vision this early? In the novel, Cassie's visions were always a bit of a mystery, and the timeline didn't suggest this would happen so soon. She hadn't been given much focus in the story, and suddenly, this new development raised questions he couldn't ignore. Cassie's restless movements escalated as she suddenly threw the blanket off, sitting up sharply. Ivan hastily set his hot pot aside and rushed over to her, grabbing her shoulders to steady her. But much to his surprise, Cassie didn't appear frightened, nor did she show the kind of reaction one would expect from someone who had just experienced a vision. Ivan, you're here," she said, her voice betraying a bit of surprise. It was clear she hadn't expected him to be there. "Yes, I'm here," Ivan replied, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. "What happened? You seemed restless in your sleep. Did you get another vision?" He tried to sound casual, but as he looked at her, something caught him off guard. Cassie was blushing. A soft pink tint had spread across her cheeks, and even the tips of her ears had turned red. She didn't answer right away, her fingers twirling a strand of her blonde hair as she seemed to gather her thoughts. It was just some mundane visions, and some personal ones," Cassie finally murmured, her voice trailing off as she spoke. With each word, her voice lowered, as if the very topic embarrassed her. Ivan's spectator attribute gave him the ability to see right through her attempts to hide her discomfort. Her face was a telltale sign. There was something she was trying to conceal, though it seemed more of a trivial matter. What could she have seen to make her so embarrassed? His mind worked quickly, and a sly grin spread across his face as an idea formed. "No way, Cass," he teased, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Invading people's privacy and peering into their most embarrassing moments. You've got no shame." As he leaned back and placed a hand on his cheek, he shook his head in mock disapproval, a grin playing at the corners of his lips. The sight of his teasing expression was all it took for Cassie's face to burst into a deep shade of red, and before Ivan knew it, she lunged at him. I didn't. I can't control what I see. She protested, her voice laced with indignation, though the blush on her face made it clear she was still flustered. Ivan barely had time to react before she pounced on him, her hands aiming for his cheeks and ears. A struggle ensued, with Cassie trying to pull on his cheeks while Ivan deftly dodged her attempts, much to her frustration. After a few moments of chaos, both of them ended up sitting side by side, slightly exhausted from their bickering. Cassie's attention shifted to the hot pot he had set down earlier. She sniffed the air, her eyes lighting up behind her laced blindfold as the spicy scent reached her nose. "Can I have some?" she asked, her voice much softer now. Ivan chuckled, as he passed her a pot of the delicious broth. "Help yourself," he said, watching as Cassie eagerly dug into the meal. There was something comforting about the simple act of sharing food. Ivan studied Cassie from the side, surprised by how much better she seemed. Her mental state, which had once been a constant source of concern, now seemed remarkably stable. Whatever she had seen in her vision had evidently resolved many of the issues she had been grappling with. The pessimistic air that had once lingered around her was gone, replaced by something lighter, more optimistic. This was a good thing. He'd had to constantly placate her to keep her mental state intact. But now, for the first time in a long while, she seemed at ease. As they ate in comfortable silence, Cassie broke it, her voice soft yet hesitant. "At the end of my vision, I saw something," she said, her words laced with uncertainty. Ivan's attention immediately sharpened, his mind racing with possibilities, though he kept his expression neutral. "Go on. I'm listening," he replied, though his heart raced at the thought of what she might share. Cassie seemed to struggle at first, trying to articulate what she had seen, but she eventually spoke, her words slow and deliberate. "Towards the end, I saw an ocean that seemed to contain all the colors in the world. High above, there was an illusory sun blazing fiercely. On my left, there was lightning, squalls, and raging waves. On my right, there was a white tower that seemed to reach the skies, and everything seemed to rotate around the center. But I couldn't see the center, and then I was suddenly kicked out and woke up." She paused, turning her face to him. The light from outside glinted off her laced blindfold. "Do you know what it is?" she asked, her voice filled with quiet curiosity. Ivan remained silent for a moment. After a minute of contemplation, he let out a quiet sigh. Of course, he knew what it was his soul see. The differences between her vision and his were evident, though. For one, he had 4 suns, not one. His soul sea was the chaos sea. Unlike normal soul seas of other awakened, he could not stay in his soul sea for long. Upon entering he would barge with ravings, increasing his chance of losing control. He glanced at his runes, pulling his attention away from the heavy thoughts swirling in his mind. Name, unwanted attention. Rank, type, mark, memory enchantments, binding gaze. Enchantment description. The mark creates a bond between the bestower and the marked, allowing the bestower to communicate and bestow gifts onto them. The stronger the marked's belief in the bestower, the greater the influence, while the bestower gains insight into the marked's thoughts and secrets. Marks. 0/1. Ivan had been considering this for some time. He had wanted to wait until the moment felt right, but something in his gut told him that now was the time. He turned to Cassie, his eyes softening as he made his decision. "Before I explain," he said, his voice steady yet laced with a hint of hesitation, "can I trust you?" Cassie looked at him, confusion flashing briefly across her face before she nodded with certainty. "Yes," she said simply. "You can trust me." Ivan took a deep breath, then began to explain, though he left out some details, particularly the parts about knowing her thoughts. He kept the explanation vague, focusing on the part about creating a bond and granting gifts. "I have an ability," he said, his voice calm. "It allows me to create a bond between us. With this bond, you can reap the benefits of my attributes and me yours, however these are on a partial basis and would not be significant enough to notice. However, if one of us betrays the other, that person would receive a punishment." He lied about the last part. He paused, watching her reaction closely. "So, my question is, are you willing to be my accomplice?" To accept this bond and everything that comes with it. Cassie didn't hesitate. She gave a firm nod. Yes, I trust you. Ivan closed his eyes briefly, relieved that her trust in him was so immediate. It wasn't a rash decision. He could tell she wasn't acting on impulse. Her mental state was in a much better place than before, which made him confident in his choice. Raise your hand, Ivan instructed, his voice low. Cassie did as he asked, and Ivan gently took her hand in his. He closed his eyes, focusing all his attention on the runes in front of him, the moment finally upon him. Do you wish to mark this individual? Yes. The runes shifted, forming new patterns, the magic flowing through him with an intensity that made his skin tingle. A sense of finality washed over him as the process completed. A bond is being created. You have marked an individual successfully. Ivan sighed, the weight of the decision settling in. The runes in front of him shifted again, updating to reflect the changes. Name: unwanted attention. Rank: type: mark. Memory enchantments: binding gaze. Marks: 1/1. Marked: Cassie. Flaw: unraveling mind. Ivan took a deep breath, as he focused on his runes. It had been done. Cassie was now marked, his accomplice. The bond between them was unlike the shadow bond that Sunny had. Unlike the shadow bond, which would enslave the person once their true name was spoken aloud, this bond was more like a bridge. While the bestower gained unrestricted access to the mind of the bestowed, it didn't give the bestower control over them. If the bestowed, Cassie in this case, firmly believed something was wrong and refused to act, the bond couldn't compel her to obey unless hypnosis was used. However, against someone with a high affinity for fate and revelation, that would be a risky move. The point of this bond was to create a connection of mind and soul between them. It was akin to acquiring a citadel in the domain of the mind. As he ascended, he suspected he would be able to create such bonds to expand his domain. This could be an early form of a domain, one he could expand through the creation of more bonds. But there was a problem: why could he only make one bond? He had 4 soul cores, so by normal logic, he should be able to create 4 such bonds. And why did he have 4 soul cores? How had he gotten them without going through the first nightmare? Ivan frowned slightly, a lost expression crossing his face. What was I thinking just now? The mark creates a bond between the bestower and the marked, allowing both the bestowed and the bestower to benefit from one another's attributes. The stronger their bond, the mightier they become. Does this mean I can benefit from Ivan's attributes as well? Will he gain revelations like me as well? He turned to look at Cassie, his eyes widening. He was listening to her, but her mouth did not move. She was reading the runes, speaking her thoughts aloud in her mind, but he could hear them as if she were whispering them directly into his ear. No way. He immediately focused back on his runes. Name: Ivan. True name: Adam. Description: rank: sleeper. Class: devil. Soul cores: 4/7. Soul fragments: 23 4/1000. Attributes: telepathist, listener, sailor, bard, student of ratiocination. Aspect: visionary. Aspect rank: divine. Innate ability: envision. Attempts: 4/7. 3 of Ivan's attributes had advanced, and all 3 were of the mind domain. Did creating the bond help him advance his attributes? There was a possibility that he could progress his attributes while his soul cores were dormant. His sailor and bard pathways hadn't advanced, perhaps they required actions related to the sea, purification, devotion, or religion. His spectator, secret suppliant, and reader pathways had advanced when he created the bond. To accommodate his bonding ability, he needed at least this much power to make it usable. That aside, this was good news. He had thought he needed to complete nightmares and ascend to increase his power, but now he realized he just needed to determine the advancement requirements and fulfill them. This would allow him to gain greater power at a lower level. Still, these attributes seemed closely tied to his soul core and soul fragments. At the same time, far to the northwest, beyond the forgotten shore and at the edge of the burned forest, a cacophony of explosions erupted. A massive cloud of smoke and dust billowed into the air, large enough to cover 3 towns. High at the edge of the smoke, a gaunt man in a tattered space suit emerged, leaping out of the chaos. As he moved, the surrounding space seemed to warp, bending and twisting in strange patterns. With a swift movement of his leg, the man accelerated, his body moving at what appeared to be normal speed, but the very fabric of space around him distorted, causing the distance and surroundings to contract. This allowed him to move at ridiculous speeds, as though the world itself bent to his will. The gaunt man in the space suit continued running, clearly trying to evade something. In the center of the smoke-filled area, a figure stood. His form was blurry, obscured by the thick dust and haze. Beside him, a quill floated in the air, writing on thin air without the figure needing to touch it. The figure, shrouded by the smoke, turned his head toward the gaunt man, then glanced at the quill. The quill wrote vigorously on the air. The gaunt man in the space suit continued to blink in and out of existence, his form appearing and disappearing with each bend of space around him. However, his aspect is not suited for handling prolonged exposure to the immense pressure of this compressed space. As he attempted to summon the souls of the residents of the burned forest, the compressed space, which had been in a state of unnatural distortion, suddenly recoiled. The recoil was an inevitable consequence of the sustained bending of space-time. When the energy holding the space in its compressed form suddenly released, it generated an intense backlash. Astarion faced the full brunt of this recoil. The compressed space snapped back, causing an explosive release of energy. The force of this energy threw Astarion in the opposite direction at extreme velocity. His space suit's visor shattered from the sudden shockwave. As the shards of the broken visor flew inward, they threatened to pierce his face, but the sovereign's body was far more resilient than ordinary flesh. Despite the assault, his face remained mostly unharmed, however in the process he dropped a wooden tablet. This is a reasonable development. That damned quill. The gaunt man in the space suit, Astarion, cursed as he stood up. As he did, a figure emerged from the receding smoke. This time, the quill remained in the figure's hand, and it wasn't writing anything. The figure approached the wooden tablet that had fallen from Astarion, bent down to pick it up, and inspected it with a keen eye. After a moment, the figure gave a satisfied smile. "You know, if you had asked nicely, I might have given it to you. Though not for free, I would have been open to trading it," Astarion said, still preparing to pull on his tether to the waking world. "For that quill, I might have agreed to an exchange. I know using that quill puts you in danger, which is why you never use it beyond a certain interval." What is your type?" Astarion's eyes widened, not because he had been cut off, but because of the question itself. "What?" he replied, his voice edged with confusion. "I am in a good mood right now," the figure said, his voice warm but carrying an undertone of something more profound. "You see, I'm having a great time right now, well, the other me, at least." As the smoke continued to dissipate, the figure's appearance became clearer. He was a man who appeared to be around 20 years old, standing at about 2 meters tall. His bright golden eyes were sharp, yet soft at the corners. His blonde hair framed his face, and the expression on his face was that of someone thoroughly enjoying the moment, radiating a smile that was warm and genuine. It was Ivan. He wore a classic black clergyman's robe, and a silver crucifix hung from his neck, catching the faint light that filtered through the smoke. "You see," Ivan started, but just then, something was thrown at him. It was shapeless, and its form was nearly impossible to detect with the naked eye. Ivan reacted instantly, ducking and avoiding the formless projectile as it zipped through the space where his head had been only moments before. Once he stood back up, however, Astarion had vanished. He had returned to the waking world. Ivan's eyes lingered on the spot where Astarion had been, then swept over his surroundings. He let out a long, weary sigh and collapsed onto his back, letting his body rest on the charred earth. The quill that had been in his hand disappeared in a small spark of light, vanishing into the air. "I really overestimated myself," Ivan muttered. In his other hand was the wooden tablet. Ivan gazed at it for a moment before casting a tired but knowing smile towards the direction of the forgotten shore. Sending him there was the right choice, Ivan thought, though a tinge of regret followed closely behind. But I'm running out of time. Ivan summoned the quill once again, the familiar feeling of the object materializing in his hand. He began to write something in the air, its strokes forming invisible symbols. I should be able to merge back before the siege of the Crimson Spire, Ivan mused as he finished writing. In one swift motion, he broke the wooden tablet in his hand, causing a surge of blinding light to erupt from it. The light enveloped him entirely, burning brighter with each passing second. The flash of light grew blinding, consuming everything around him. After a moment, the light began to dim, slowly dissipating into the air until it was completely gone. The terrain remained unchanged. The ground was still charred, barren, and lifeless, with no sign of life. Under the false sun, the forgotten shore gave out an eerie red glow. Amongst the crimson labyrinth a tree stood out of place. This magnificent tree stands atop the ashen barrow with its onyx branches and vibrant scarlet leaves. It looked striking and majestic. Its fruits, hanging between the scarlet leaves, were round and appetizing. Beneath the great tree, was a creature and 4 silhouettes engrossed in a fight. The creature was as large as a house, with its 8 segmented legs resembling tall pillars. Its form was similar to that of scavengers and centurions, consisting of a crab-like carapace and a protruding, somewhat humanoid torso. However, this was where the similarities between them ended. Instead of chitin, the behemoth's shell was seemingly made out of polished, lustrous metal. It was as though its whole body had been once submerged into a crucible of molten steel, emerging from it encased in an impenetrable suit of shining armor. The demon's head was more pronounced than that of a scavenger and crowned with several tall, sharp horns. Its metal face was almost human-like, but simultaneously repulsively monstrous and bestial. It was a carapace demon, an awakened demon. One of the silhouettes shakily rising to its legs. A stubborn light was burning in its eyes. Producing a loud screech, it clacked its pincers in the air and once again rushed toward the demon. The smaller creature bravely ran toward the steel behemoth, raising its pincers to attack. A fraction of a second after its attempt to attack, the demon caught the creature and slightly strained its arms and tore the creature in two, separating its torso from the carapace and crushing both halves into a bloody pulp. While it was distracted, a figure appeared behind it. He had bright gold hair and golden eyes that seemed as bright as the sun. On his hand was a machine gun. He fired continuously at the towering demon. Cracks started to appear on the back of the polished metal carapace. The demon immediately turned around and attacked the blonde boy. The blonde boy did not stop shooting, only jumping back and creating distance between himself and the demon. Just as the attention of the demon was concentrated on the blonde boy, a girl appeared from behind the demon. Her silvery hair cascaded down her back, her gray eyes reflecting the same cold determination that burned within her heart. It was Nephes of the immortal flame. She dashed forward with all her might. A shadow passed beside her. Sunny dashed toward the demon's legs. By now the demon had already noticed their approach and had turned back to intercept them. Nephes had managed to avoid the massive pincer and was closing in on them, too. Sunny and Nephes reached their goals almost simultaneously, one from the right, the other from the left. Sunny slashed with the azure blade, feeling it hit the polished armor and bounce back without leaving even a slight scratch on it. Sunny crushed under his breath. On the other side of the behemoth's massive body, Nephes made significant progress. She attacked the monster's injured front leg, cutting deep into its flesh through a wide crack in the metal plate. Severely damaged, the leg could no longer support the giant creature's weight. It buckled, sending the demon reeling. Her graceful form flew through the air like an arrow released from a powerful bow, leaving afterimages behind. The silver blade of her longsword glimmered in the light of dawn, while her black and white armor blurred with every movement. Beneath her, an ethereal golden haze materialized. It was subtle, almost imperceptible in the heat of battle, but it was there, silently empowering her. She was all in, rushing at the enemy without leaving herself the slightest chance to retreat. The demon reacted almost immediately, recognizing the threat. But, almost, didn't count on the battlefield. A moment of distraction was all it took to lose everything. That single mistake, no matter how small, had sealed its fate. As she ran, the rhythm of her steps changed. The agony she should have felt using her aspect was lessened, her body moving with ease. In the next instant, a soft white radiance ignited beneath the skin of her hands. But this time, it didn't stay there. The white flame flowed outward into the hilt of the silver sword, then into its blade. The sword transformed into a sharp, radiant edge, burning with incandescent white light. It shone so brightly that Sunny had to resist the urge to close his eyes. But the radiance wasn't soft and warm anymore. It seemed capable of reducing anything it touched to ash, sharp enough to cut the fabric of the world itself. A few steps away from the carapace demon's towering torso, Neffys bent her legs and leapt into the air. Her sword flashed forward in a vicious thrust, so fast that, for a moment, it looked like a beam of pure white sunlight. Then, it collided with the strange alloy of the giant's lustrous armor, right at the spot where his heart should have been. At the same time, standing on the edge of the fight, a boy with golden hair smiled slightly and murmured, "Finally." Dense golden and holy flames erupted across the demon's body before entering its metal form. Then, Changing Star's sword reached the carapace demon's heart, slicing it apart, incinerating everything around it, and making the azure blood of the fearsome creature boil and evaporate. Sunny's legs buckled, and he gracelessly fell onto his ass. Wah, we did it. Yes, we did, came the blonde boy's response from behind him. The boy, Ivan, looked at the remains of the demon and spoke in a light-hearted tone. That was quite the fight, wasn't it? And here you were saying we were crazy. Ivan stopped and glanced at the duo with a confused expression. Neffys and Sunny were staring at him, their expressions unreadable. Was it awe, dumbfoundedness, or just plain bewilderment? What? Why are you staring at me like that? Ivan asked. Why? Are you really asking that right now? Sunny spoke up. His expression was much easier to read. He didn't go out of his way to suppress it, unlike Neffys, whose face rarely showed emotion. However, thanks to Ivan's spectator ability, he could read deeper than most. You brought out a bloody machine gun in a sword fight, Sunny blurted out. No, that isn't even why I'm flabbergasted, he continued. It's the fact that it worked against the bloody crab, whatever the hell that thing was. Didn't you say the weapons you make can't be used against awakened abominations? Sunny had every right to be skeptical, as Ivan had previously claimed that whatever weapons he made wouldn't be effective against these nightmare creatures. Ivan finally seemed to understand what the duo meant by their looks. He responded calmly. I didn't lie about that, but I never said guns don't work. Ordinary guns don't, but this one is modified to work with awakened powers and soul essence. And the old saying goes, it's always better to bring a gun to a knife fight, wouldn't you agree? Ivan said, but as he did, he saw that neither of them was convinced. This could be a problem. If he didn't explain himself soon, both of them would likely distrust him, despite their shared survival. He sighed. I'm not lying. It's the truth. It's something I came up with before the fight. It was only theoretical, though, so I decided to test it while I had the chance. Turning to look at one of the tree's branches, he turned back to the duo. Let's head back. Cassie's waiting for us, and let's have a feast. Whatever you guys want to eat. The duo didn't hesitate. They started moving to clean up the scene while Sunny went back to the branch to get Cassie down. Ivan simply stood, watching the scene unfold. As expected, they seemed to naturally overlook my presence, almost forgetting I was even here. I guess that's the spectator ability for you. It didn't work like this when it was just Cassie and me, though. In large groups, I'm pretty much forgettable. Ivan turned to look at the tree with an impassive expression. As a pinnacle of the mind domain, I can naturally sense other beings who rely on or use powers related to it. Now, I can almost physically see the soul-devouring tree using its mind hexes on the Forgotten Shore trio, slowly but surely attempting to turn them into its loyal thralls. However, something so weak can't seem to affect me, or rather, it seems to avoid me. It almost feels like it's trying to convey an offer. Hey, it can sense that it can't win against me, so it's trying to make an irresistible offer. Unfortunately for you, ancient fiend, I have a story to look over. Hey guys, I apologize for the inconsistent updates schedule, but it's just simply how I roll. I have decided to jump over to the more crucial and important moments, as I said there won't be much changes to the OG story except some parts where Ivan will be doing his spectator stuff. I assure you that the story will get more interesting after the end of The Forgotten Shore, as for now I only plan to build up the story and Ivan's character and things he might go out to do. As for when the next update will be, the next chapter will hopefully be out by mid-next week, possibly earlier, no promises. I just hope you enjoy my fanfic and comment and let me know what plot holes, there aren't any, you want me to fix, or simply let me know your thoughts and what you think Ivan should have done different, although he hasn't done anything so far except simp over Cassie, partly my fault. Anyways, thank you for reading. Several days prior, after Ivan and Cassie formed their bond, they left the small cave and began heading west. Ivan shared his true name with Cassie, who was visibly shocked. She recalled that the only other person she had heard of receiving a true name as a sleeper was Nephis, the last member of the Immortal Flame clan. Receiving a true name after one's first nightmare was not just rare, it was almost unheard of. Simply revealing such a fact would attract the attention of the great clans. If a sleeper were to join one of these clans, they would be showered with soul shards and granted all the memories they could ask for. Had Ivan not told her he came from a middle-class household, she might have mistaken him for a legacy. From her previous vision, she had already seen how he looked, and it wasn't far-fetched to think he was in a class of his own in terms of appearance. He almost seemed like a royal from one of the novels or webtoons she used to secretly read. However, what truly took her aback the most was hearing his true name. Okay, let me get this straight, your true name, which you received after your first nightmare, is literally just Adam. Cassie couldn't shake the sheer oddity of Ivan's character. First, he had 5 attributes, which in itself was exceedingly rare, but each of those attributes was of a more mundane nature, nothing like the supernatural traits Cassie was accustomed to seeing in the academy. And now, even his true name was ordinary. She couldn't wrap her head around it. True names like Immortal Flame, Broken Sword, Smile of Heaven, Wake of Ruin, and the most recent Changing Star all danced in her mind like ethereal stars. Yet among those stars was a radiant, fluffy ball of fur, dancing in between. Just as she imagined this comical scene, Ivan spoke up. Even though my true name may seem mundane, we shouldn't underestimate it. Cassie tilted her head in confusion, her eyes hidden behind her laced blindfold. What do you mean? Ivan continued, while it's true that my name and attributes are mundane, they could still hold more significance than anything else. For example, the first human's name was Adam. He was the father of humanity and the first to walk the earth. Receiving the true name of Adam could signify the beginning of something, perhaps the beginning of countless possibilities. After all, humanity has a lot of untapped potential. Just as much as it is a tenacious cockroach, it survives no matter the calamity. Cassie stared at him, her awe evident despite the blindfold. She blurted out, wait, the first human's name was Adam. Yes. At least, that's what the Bible says, before the dark times. Although, many people have different interpretations of that story. Cassie was captivated. She asked him a flurry of questions about the topic, and they continued their conversation for some time. Cassie's mother paused. It has been several days since I received the news that my daughter had entered the dream realm. It all felt like a horrible nightmare, which is quite ironic because many people have to go through a nightmare to awaken. I couldn't help but wonder if this was her first nightmare. Even though she was already past the age most people experience it and has a family of her own, including a teenage daughter, it's not unheard of for late bloomers to face their first nightmare later in life. From what I've read online and what I know, the spell almost always places people in a forgotten part of history to test the sleepers. Right now, she was walking down the road back from the market in NQSC, so it seemed highly unlikely she was in a nightmare trial. But after my daughter was infected by the nightmare spell, my husband and I became consumed with worry and fear. When she survived, we were overjoyed, but that joy would soon crumble when we learned of her flaw. Cassie's flaw was blindness, and any semblance of hope we had for our family was shattered. In a couple of months, the winter solstice would arrive, and the sleepers would enter the dream realm for the first time, becoming awakened. For Cassie, however, this felt like a death sentence. Every day, Cassie would shed tears in her room. My husband and I barely held it together, trying our best to comfort her, but the reality of the situation was determined to break us down. Not long after, Cassie came out of her room and made the decision to go to the Awakened Academy. She was brave. She put on a strong front and comforted us when it should have been the other way around. But it was obvious what she was doing. She didn't want us to feel burdened, so she chose to walk toward her own destined death. And I couldn't do anything about it. Her face crumpled into a grimace. She wanted to shed tears, but what good would tears do for her daughter? After all, according to the spell, the gods were dead, begging them wouldn't help either. But still, she wanted to try. She wanted to hope that a god might answer her dearest wish. She was going to do whatever it took, even if the end turned out to be hopeless. She opened her bag and pulled out a piece of paper with an address written on it. Church of Aurora, St. Aria's Cathedral, 5th Avenue, Dunstan Lane. Her good friend had given it to her when they met in the market. She was a great friend, someone she could rely on. She had also adopted a daughter a while back, and when she heard about her situation, she had given her the address and told her to go to the church and pray. Her friend had shared that she and her husband had become believers in the Church of Aurora, followers of the true Creator. It was quite surprising to hear this in the current age, especially when the nightmare spell had replaced the idea of worshipping divine entities. Even though there were some radicals and fanatics who still worshipped the nightmare spell, it was much rarer to encounter someone who believed in a deity. After the dark times, most people became atheists or agnostics, so it was safe to say that she was taken aback by her friend's newfound faith. Her friend didn't force her to believe in this deity, but she did proselytize a little, offering a brief sermon about the true Creator. Among the things she had said were, "The Lord embodies the truth of this world. He is supreme. His divine grace flows abundantly like the sea. He created everything and shall annihilate everything. He is power incarnate." She would be lying if she said she wasn't at least intrigued by this God. What surprised her, though, was the fact that it had been around for over a decade, yet she had only heard its name for the first time today. Her friend even claimed that this God answered the prayers of their followers and, on occasion, bestowed blessings. If anyone else had told her this, she would have dismissed it as a scam. But coming from her friend, someone who wasn't naive enough to believe in fairy tales without solid proof, she couldn't ignore it. After a brief moment of hesitation, she decided to go to St. Aria's Cathedral. After walking for a while, she had arrived at the address where the cathedral was located. Her breath caught as she gazed up at the cathedral. It was unlike anything she had ever seen in NQSC. The size was overwhelming, especially in a place where space was such a rare and valuable commodity. Despite its lack of towering height, the sheer scale of the building was enough to make it stand out among the more utilitarian structures around it. The walls were pure white, almost glowing in the soft light of the late afternoon, while the colorful glass murals on the windows told tales of the scriptures with such vividness that they almost seemed to shimmer. People of all walks of life were streaming in and out of the cathedral, their faces lit with expressions of hope and contentment. It was as if the invisible weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Even the homeless residents from the outskirts of NQSC, who had no reason to smile, seemed at ease. She hesitated at the entrance for a moment, her hand still holding the crumpled paper with the address written on it. There were no grandiose gates or overly ornate symbols to mark the entrance, just a simple, welcoming door that opened to anyone. The faint scent of incense wafted through the air, mixing with the afternoon breeze. The moment she entered, the atmosphere shifted. It was quieter inside, but not in a cold or empty way. The floors were polished, the pews well kept, and the soft golden light of candles flickered in front of a tall cross in the center of the hall. She moved further in, drawn by an almost magnetic pull toward the cross. The few people still inside had their heads bowed in prayer while they were seated at rows of benches, and others stood, whispering soft words that blended into the hum of the church. She had never seen anything like it. She had never been to a place of worship before, only heard about them from her father and her now dead grandfather. She felt a lump rise in her throat as she approached the cross. The tears she had been holding back, the ones she had swallowed over the past few days, threatened to spill over. She didn't know what she believed, but in that moment, she desperately wished for something. For Cassie. It was then that she noticed a figure in front of the cross, someone she hadn't noticed before, as the cross had captured most of her attention. The figure was a woman, likely in her mid-20s, younger than herself. Her brown hair cascaded down her shoulders, and a translucent veil covered her head, falling in front of her face and barely concealing her eyes. A dozen or so people sat on the front benches, not in prayer, but listening intently to the woman's preaching. The red angel is the Lord's rage, the Lord's punishment. His appearance over the land means war is at hand. The woman's voice carried with a presence that captivated her. The words seemed to describe an angel that served the true Creator. She continued to gaze forward, her thoughts drifting, when she heard someone call her from behind. Turning around, she saw a man in his 40s, dressed in simple but neat attire, approaching her with a kind yet respectful expression. "Madam, Lady Arya is currently in her preaching session. It can be a little distracting to stand in the center aisle and stare. Would you kindly take a seat here?" His voice was soft, but carried the weight of respect for the sanctity of the space. He had adorned a black clergyman robe, and a crucifix hung on his chest. He had light gray hair. After hearing the man, she nearly blurted out loud in surprise, but had managed to control her voice before asking, "That was Arya?" "As in saint." The man smiled. "Indeed, this cathedral was named after her. However, she isn't an awakened saint. A lot of people confuse it, so rest assured the saint is simply a virtuous title given to the most devout here," he explained. He then asked a question of his own. "Say madam, I am not familiar with you, are you new here?" She then explained her situation to the man in front of her, who seemed to be a high-ranking priest of this church. She didn't explain in detail, simply the things that are eating her from the inside and the pain of a mother. The man listened intently. Surprisingly, he was an honest man. He did not give her false hope, like telling her as long as she prayed and believed in the true Creator, her daughter would be miraculously saved. He did his best to console her, and it did help her soothe her mind from the whirlwind of emotions to a certain extent. He told her that life is a test and that with every hardship, ease will follow. He told her to be patient and to try praying in one of the benches. She didn't have to convert or believe in their God, just praying would do. She didn't expect any great help from the man or anything, to be honest, but she decided to listen to the man's advice. It wouldn't hurt to pray. After all, everyone prays in some form or another, whether consciously or not. She sat in of the more secluded benches. She kept the groceries on the side. For a moment, there was only silence, the distant hum of the woman's preaching barely audible as she gathered her thoughts. Then, her soft voice resounded as she whispered the honorific name the old man had told her. "The Lord that created everything, the Lord who reigns behind the curtain of shadows, the origin of all living things." She inhaled deeply, the words leaving her lips in a gentle whisper. She continued, her plea growing from the depths of her soul. "I beseech thee, please save my daughter, Cassie. Please, save her from the cruelty of the dream realm. Please, shield her from the darkness that haunts her, the torment that awaits her." Her throat tightened, but she forced the words to keep coming, as if voicing them might release some of the weight on her chest. "Please, ease the burden on our family. Lord, we still have hope, though it fades with each passing day. Please, grant us the strength to endure, to carry on without succumbing to despair. Let Cassie feel your grace, your presence in the darkness." Her voice faltered slightly, but she pressed on, her hands gripping one another with desperate conviction. "Make it so that she might be freed from this curse, and that she may return to us, whole and unharmed. I beg of you, true Creator, grant us a miracle. Let her know she is not alone in this struggle. Let her feel the warmth of your protection." The words hung in the air, her prayer lingering between her and whatever force might be listening. There was no answer, but as she finished, she felt a shift in herself. A small sense of calm, like a fleeting whisper, had settled in her heart. She wasn't sure what it was or if it was just the quiet of the cathedral, but for the first time in days, she felt just a little less alone. She lowered her hands slowly, unsure if her prayer had been heard. When she raised her head, she was not greeted by the familiar hall of the church. Rather, she found herself standing on air on top of what looks like a coral labyrinth. The environment started to move, or rather she started to move. The surrounding became a blur. She didn't even get time to be surprised. Everything seemed to happen in an instant. Soon the surroundings became clear. She was scared. She didn't know what was happening. She looked around. It looked close to evening time. The coral labyrinth had an eerie red glow. She frantically tried to move, but she couldn't. She only remained standing. Just then she noticed something. She noticed figures seated on a highly elevated rock formation. Then, she saw someone she thought she would never get to see, except in a hollowed body. It was Cassie, her only daughter. She had her hands to cover her mouth, and an indescribable feeling surged in her heart. Tears started to form in her eyes. She wanted nothing more than to run up to Cassie, to hug her and hold her tight, but at that moment, her movements were restricted. In that instant, she felt as though her wishes had been granted. God really existed. God hadn't forsaken her daughter. The preaching woman's voice rang in her head. God loves the world. ... She looked at Cassie more clearly. Cassie wore a dress that fit her perfectly. The lace up front added a subtle touch of elegance, accentuating her slim figure. The deep purple fabric cascaded down in soft, flowing folds. Cassie had donned a black lace blindfold over her eyes, but rather than hiding her beauty, it only seemed to accentuate it more. She then noticed that Cassie was talking to someone, though she couldn't hear what was being said. She could tell from Cassie's animated expression that she was speaking with excitement and curiosity. She turned to look at the person. The person Cassie was talking to was a boy. He had golden hair and sharp golden eyes. His appearance was striking. He could easily be an icon among his peers. She wasn't sure how to feel about the situation, with a boy and a girl being together alone, but she reminded herself that this was the dream realm. Another matter was sleepers didn't take their clothes with them the first time they entered the dream realm, so it meant this boy had saved Cassie and provided her with those clothes. At least she could tell that this boy had no ill intentions toward Cassie. Just by looking at him, she couldn't help but think of him as a sun appearing in the darkness. It was exactly what she had wished for. Just as she was thinking this, the boy with golden hair seemed to notice something. He didn't interrupt Cassie, who was still talking. He simply raised his head and looked in a specific direction. What the? He didn't look at just any random direction. He looked straight at the spot where Cassie's mother was watching from. It's me again. An early chapter here, which was supposed to come out tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed this chapter, as this will be one of the setting I set for future events. If you like my work, give a vote and add it to collections and comment your thoughts. I read all the comments. Your thoughts are important to me as it gives me motivation and helps me cover my flaws for future works. Turning his head in a direction, he could have sworn he felt a gaze on him, but when he scanned the area, there was nothing. In the dream realm, there is one rule: never directly gaze over, or else you risk exposing your position. That is why the awakened never directly look at a nightmare creature until they are ready to attack and kill it. Scanning the area one more time and seeing nothing, he decided to turn his head back to the still talking Cassie. She was continuing her life story. One of the things that surprised him was the fact that she had actually been struggling with her studies, and that before her first nightmare, she was almost certain she would fail her class. Coming from her, it was a surprise, especially considering she was, if not one of the smartest humans to ever walk, certainly one of the most intelligent. She had almost entirely on her own planned on breaking fate, and she had succeeded. It was one of those achievements that even if it was witnessed by the entirety of humanity, they would still refuse to believe it. And to top it all off, she had done so as a master. It was almost impossible to imagine someone who almost failed school achieving such a ridiculous feat. Just then, the duo stopped talking as they heard noise coming from the side of the elevated rock formation. Cassie tensed up, but unlike in the past, she wasn't too shaken. Instead, she was waiting for instructions from Adam. But the instruction didn't come, and she was starting to get worried, so she asked in a hushed voice. But Ivan simply didn't say anything, he kept looking in the direction of the noise. Eventually, a figure of a woman entered the scene. She was tall and lithe, with silky silver hair and clear, gray eyes. She wore a simple tunic. She was poised, alert, and barefoot. Cassie had long gone silent. Ivan suspected that she must be following after his actions. Standing up and envisioning a random sword, he stood between the two ladies. Gods, why does this feel like a really badly written drama? It's like the MC protecting the women he loves against the villainous fiancé, he mused as he raised the sword. State your identity, he said with a commanding voice. Of course, he knew who she was and her identity, but that was the problem, he knew too much, and that was an issue. He was just a spectator and background character, and if he didn't show surprise in front of the immortal flame's last heiress, that would incur suspicion. Considering how mad she was, recalling her suicidal conquest of the Crimson Spire, there was no telling what might happen if a variable like himself appeared in the middle of the main cast's play. However, the next scene was absolutely out of his expectations. Nefis entirely ignored him as if not even noticing his presence, walking over to Cassie and extending an arm, asking the same of her. Give your hand, Nefis requested. Cassie was visibly confused as well. She didn't recognize the woman's voice. This woman had ignored Adam's question and simply approached her, ordering her to give her hand. In such a situation, no matter what, it was not normal to ignore someone like Adam. She didn't give her hand. Instead, she asked a question in return, why? And who are you? She was unsure of what to do or even what to ask. Adam seemed to be silent for some reason. Nefis tilted her head slightly, as if confused. It's not safe to traverse the dream realm naked. You need some protection against the elements, or else you might die. As for who I am Nefis. Cassie's eyes widened behind the laced blindfold. In front of her stood none other than the last member of the Immortal Flame clan. But she was equally confused. What did she mean by naked? She couldn't possibly mean me, could she? No, Nef wasn't blind, she was, but she was fully clothed, and it couldn't be because of the darkness, because Adam had said it was still evening time and the sun hadn't set. Nef, as you can see, I am not naked. I'm fully clothed. Adam made these for me, she said while showcasing her dress. Nefis, in return, became confused, then scanned Cassie from top to bottom before suddenly her eyes widened. She turned her head in Ivan's direction as if only finally noticing his presence. She narrowed her eyes. Her face remained expressionless, but in the eyes of a spectator reading emotions, no matter how hidden, it was the same as reading an open book. There was a hint of panic, which was replaced by cold reasoning. Then the emotion turned mild but still weary. Who are you? She blatantly asked. Excuse me, that's a question I should be asking you. That aside, she must have come to the reasoning that if Ivan was an assassin sent by the great clans, he wouldn't have gone out of his way to get a burden. And in a sense, she wasn't wrong. An assassin simply sent to kill her wouldn't bother saving someone like Cassie. Outwardly, his expression remained calm, but inside, there was a storm. Everything, every plan and possibility he had thought of, might have been wrong. First, his appearance in the story seemed to be completely disregarded. Nefis seemed to fail to notice his presence entirely. Second, no matter what, the story would always go according to how it was fated. Then there was Cassie's and Nefis's interaction. Cassie had dropped honorifics and directly called Nefis by her nickname, Nef, almost as if they had known each other for a while. Ivan even suspected that if he had not formed a bond with Cassie prior to this interaction, all his progress with her might have been reset, forgotten, to go with the flow of the main story. Ivan was in a dilemma. He didn't know what to do. Until now, he had been worried about how the story would turn out, but instead, he should have been worried about how he would turn out. No matter his plans and predictions, all would be pointless if nothing was changeable. No, it was changeable. The fact that Cassie was able to remember him and refer to him was proof. The only problem was that Cassie was the only one who had changed slightly due to him. For FCK's Sake, when did Fated and Fateless have a baby? Should you be asking that, Lady Changing Star? Ivan answered shortly. For now, he had no choice but to go with the flow. As for my name, you can call me Ivan. Cassie's mother paused. Walking through a wide hallway of St. Aria's Cathedral, the walls were inscribed with majestic paintings and murals, depicting stories from the church's Bible. Two figures were walking through the hallway. One was a brunette in her mid-20s, her brown hair cascading down her shoulders, with a translucent veil covering her head and falling over her face, barely obscuring her eyes. It was none other than Saint Aria, after whom the very cathedral was named. The second figure was a woman in her early 30s, Cassie's mother. I am really glad you chose to be a priestess of our church. I have to say, I was very surprised when I heard God had answered your call immediately after you prayed. You should consider yourself really lucky, especially since you weren't a believer. Even I don't get such a miracle that often, Saint Aria said, her voice melodious, almost like a lullaby. Cassie's mother only gave a humble reply and downplayed herself. Occasionally, she would ask questions regarding the murals and her job as a priestess. You don't actually have any great duties here. Instead, we are quite free-spirited. You only need to show up at least once or twice a week. You can choose your job, whether it's cleaning duty, feeding the poor people from the outskirts, attending scripture lessons, or being on preaching duty. Food and any needs you might have for yourself and your family will be covered by the church, as well as a salary. But to officially become a priestess, you would need to wait for approval from the deacon, then attend training for several months. However, since your situation is more special than anyone else's, the Holy Emperor himself has approved of you joining the clergy, Saint Aria explained. Cassie's mother was taken aback. For such a large church, she expected quite a strict routine. After all, she had her own home to take care of as a full-fledged housewife. She had offered to join on impulse and excitement, but later felt worried about how she would juggle her routine. But thanks to this, she could come here every once in a while, do several chores, attend classes, feed the poor, and then be done with her day. Better yet, she would be paid, and any needs of her family would be taken care of by the church. It sounded amazing. She then asked, how many cathedrals or churches do we have? She was curious about the size of the Church of Aurora. Oh, we have a lot of churches. At least 4 churches in NQSC, and many more in other Siege Quadrant cities. Recently, our church started a massive project of expanding to Antarctica, Saint Aria excitedly explained, while Cassie's mother simply listened with her mouth agape. Eventually, she asked another question. Earlier, you mentioned the Holy Emperor. Who is he? At that question, Saint Aria stopped talking and coughed in embarrassment. Oh, my bad. I should have explained the inner workings of our church before everything else. The Holy Emperor is God's representative on earth. Essentially, he is the Pope of our church. He can directly talk to God and has no need for revelations, and, the Holy Emperor, is simply his title, Saint Aria explained. Cassie's mother continued listening, but as the words sank in, her face slowly turned pale. When she had proclaimed her wish to join the church, the old man had told her she would be meeting with the Pope. Right now, she was certain there was a God. And if the Pope could directly talk to God, was she even worthy of being in the presence of someone like that? Her sweat and worry, however, went unnoticed by Saint Aria, who was still guiding her through the cathedral with a serene, almost blissful air. Eventually, they reached an opaque, glass-like wall. Cassie's mother was confused, but then, Saint Aria stood shoulder to her right and crossed her fingers with hers. Calm down, and just follow my lead, Saint Aria said. Then, to Cassie's mother's shock, she was pulled into the glass-like wall. It felt as though she were walking into a dead-end cliff, but somehow, defying all logic. It felt as if gravity itself had been deceived. In a dizzying, 360-degree rotation, she found herself standing upright again. It was as though she had walked into an upside-down world, the scenery around her twisting and warping as if the very laws of reality had been bent. The ground beneath her felt unfamiliar, the air different, even the light that filtered through seemed warped, almost ethereal. She looked around in a daze, trying to make sense of what had just happened. "Don't worry," Saint Arya's calm voice broke through her confusion. "This is a special chamber known only to the clergy of the church. It's a passage between the realms, almost like the dream realm, and only those who have been specially chosen can enter." Cassie's mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had so many questions, but the sight before her left her speechless. Saint Arya continued, "The Holy Emperor is waiting for us on the other side. Just trust me and follow my lead." As they stepped forward, Cassie's mother took a deep breath and continued walking, following the saint. The surroundings kept changing. At one moment, it was an ornate grand hallway, at another, it was a garden-lined passage. The scenery kept shifting into different forms, but she didn't question Saint Arya this time, as she felt she wouldn't get an answer. Eventually, the surroundings stopped changing, and they entered a very humble room. On the left side, there were bookshelves filled with library books. To the front and right, there was a very comfortable and fluffy couch, a bed, and a study table. On the fluffy couch sat a young-looking man with his eyes closed. Saint Arya bowed to one knee and gestured for Cassie's mother to do the same. She was now in the presence of the Pope of the Church of Aurora. "I greet His Holiness," Saint Arya greeted the young man with utmost respect. The young man's eyes fluttered open. "Ah, you're here, Arya." He stood up. His hair was white with a golden hue, cascading down his back as if he hadn't bothered to cut it in quite some time. Cassie's mother couldn't help but feel as though this room was like a prison. Shaking her head, she cleared her thoughts and prepared herself to answer any questions. "You may stand," the young man ordered, his voice low but lethally sharp. "It's been a while since God sent a revelation so suddenly," the young man began speaking. "Ah, I should introduce myself, my name is Keter.